number of opposition backbenchers in for a statement is very few. I spy no Liberal Democrats at all. The DUP, of course, is here. And at the start of the statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, there were just 4 Labour backbenchers. They do not want to be here to listen to Brexit opportunities and the savings and benefits to this country. Now, the able Minister has said that this quarterly reporting is going to come out, and hopefully he'll come to the House to do that. Could he publicise that in advance so that Liberal Democrat and Labour members will know not to attend?
I am very grateful to my honourable friend for his wise and witty suggestion.
Jonathan Edwards.
Madam Deputy Speaker, he mentioned in his statement that he hopes the proposals he's made today will reduce the cost of living. But isn't it actually the case that the British government's post-Brexit policy is leading to reduced investor confidence, leading to a weakening currency which further fuels inflation? Wouldn't a responsible government, therefore, facing the very serious problems faced by households across the UK, stop shredding European regulations and rejoin the single market?
No, the honourable gentleman knows that I'm not going to agree with that suggestion because it would negate the referendum, where a majority of people in Wales voted in favour of leaving, as did the majority of people in England. But that this is about reducing costs and taking burdens off. The single market is an extraordinarily regulatory organisation that boosts costs of services and indeed of manufactured goods. To go back into it would make life more expensive and would make things worse for British consumers.
David Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I congratulate my right honourable friend on his statement and say how much I welcome the publication of the dashboard, because it no doubt provides a very revealing snapshot of the extent to which the body of law of the United Kingdom has been infiltrated by frequently undemocratically formulated EU law. But may I echo the words of the honourable member for East Antrim? The big exception, of course, is Northern Ireland, which is continuing to receive a stream of laws because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. May I urge the government to press ahead with the Northern Ireland Protocol bill, which is urgently needed?
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is beginning to sound like business questions, so I will make sure that his request is passed on to my right honourable friend, the Lord President of the Council.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Small and medium-sized enterprises are the backbone of the British economy. They drive forward innovation, they create jobs. They don't have huge departments to help them with the mountain of red tape that is currently suffocating SMEs because of this government's botched Brexit. Can the Minister please set out specifically what his plan is to reduce that mountain of red tape so that these small and medium-sized enterprises can be supported rather than crushed by the Brexit the form of Brexit that he supports?
The retained EU law bill.
Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, is it my right honourable friend's view that the most bureaucracy placed on British businesses who are trying to export is actually placed on them by the requirements made by other EU countries who seem to be making it a lot harder for us to export to them than we're making it for them to export to us?
Yes, I'm grateful to my honourable friend because that's a very important point. Free trade benefits the receiver of free trade. And therefore, just because the EU makes it harder for us to export to them is no reason to retaliate in kind, because all that does is make things more expensive for our consumers and for our businesses. That is why we are not imposing the full set of controls that the EU imposes on us on the 1st of July. It is why we are looking to the single trade window by the end of 2023 to lower the barriers to trade from around the world, to improve the fluidity of our borders. Why? Because that benefits our economy, even if we do it unilaterally. And that is fundamentally important. The EU has never understood that, and it's why it's such a high-cost area.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the right honourable member for the statement. I know that as a member of the European Scrutiny Committee, he appeared at our committee on this very subject a couple of months ago. The Treasury have announced reforms to the Consumer Credit Act as part of this package, and in the current economic climate it's imperative that vulnerable consumers are adequately protected, particularly when it comes to credit agreements. Can the Minister confirm how the Government expects to ensure full consultation with traditionally hard-to-reach groups?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't know if the Honourable Lady will particularly want a compliment from me, but she is one of the most assiduous attenders in this House, fighting for people who face difficulties as her constituents, holding ministers to account, ensuring that their concerns are brought to the floor of this House. Now, I may not agree with her overriding political philosophy, but that is what we are here to do as members of Parliament. We are the champions of the hard-to-reach people. We are the people who hold governments to account. We are the ones who ensure that bills include that as they make their way through Parliament, and the Honourable Lady, dare I say it, is a model example of how this can be done.
Craig McKinley.
Deputy Speaker, can I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for outlining in his usual way a summary masterclass of what the Brexit Freedoms Bill will mean. And I think it would be fair to say the British public have not realised how we have got to the legislative framework that we have, whether it's through primary legislation in this place, whether it's directives, regulation, the override of the 1972 Communities Act. And it cannot be fair that whether we manufacture something, we provide services or anything that moves, that nobody can actually be sure, because we don't have the consolidated legislation that says this is the rules applying to the manufacture of paper, for instance. Will you agree with me that this will be a refreshing opening up of the legislative framework that we have, so that we can actually make it better, more streamlined, but most importantly accountable to this place and the British people?
Yes, indeed. I think that by putting it online, making it open to people and, of course, to members of Parliament, it will be much clearer where the blockages are, where the obstructions are, where the difficulties for businesses are. And once you know where they are by the detail of the legislative instrument, it becomes much easier to remove them.
Onfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's increasingly clear that the Right Honourable Member's ministerial title refers to the political opportunities the government see in reopening Brexit wounds as often as possible. His pointless statement today ignores the wishes of the British people, who want the government to stop banging on about Brexit and start tackling the issues they face in their daily lives. It ignores the wishes of business, although we know what the Prime Minister's view to business is, summed up in a four-letter expletive. But wasn't his Cabinet colleague, the Environment Secretary, right when he said, quote, "Messing around with retained law wastes officials' time, costs businesses money, and is unlikely to make much difference"?
It happens. My right honourable friend, the DEFRA Secretary, has been extremely helpful in this process. So I wouldn't believe everything that he reads in second-tier publications. This is not about opening wounds. It is the Labour Party who always wanted to oppose what people had voted for. They thought their voters didn't know what they were doing. They treat their electors with contempt, and the results were reaped in December 2019. This is about getting the advantages from Brexit. This is about the agenda that was set out in the 2019 manifesto, but also in 2016 at the time of the referendum, of how we benefit from leaving the European Union. We don't now want slavishly to follow the diktats of the EU. That would be a way of losing all the advantages. This is the way of making the economy more efficient, getting supply-side reforms, and making goods and services cheaper.
Marcus Fish.
Deputy Speaker, can I welcome this statement from my right honourable friend and say that it is great that we are finally moving forward with the task of optimising conditions here in the UK for businesses and for individuals. And does he agree with me that this is an essential part, actually, of moving on with the process? The number of times that I've had friends who might have voted to remain say to me, what was the point of this? Show us what the point was, because we want to change things now. We actively want to change rules in the city, rules in agriculture. Will he drive this forward with every effort?
my honourable friend hits the nail on the head that both of us represent rural constituencies in Somerset. And one of the great advantages of Brexit is taking the red tape that ties up farmers away, to simplify the processes, to make it easier for them to get on with the business of farming. And it is not surprising that a very large number of retained EU law acts are within the auspices of DEFRA, because that has been a primary responsibility of the European Union, and we need to be able to clear away the thicket to make life easier. He is absolutely right.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. They remove our businesses from a single market of 500 million people. They remove our collective right to live, work and travel across the European Union. They're delivering the slowest economic growth in the entire G20, aside from Russia, of course. And what do we get in return? We get an interactive dashboard and potentially more powerful vacuum cleaners. He makes a compelling case for Scotland to choose a different path, does he not?
Here, here.
Well, I think there is a compelling case for Scotland to remain within the United Kingdom, which is what people voted for in 2014, and there seems to be a remarkable short-sightedness about the length of a generation, which, as I understood it, was going to be the period before there was another vote. But what we have done is what the British people voted for. And the truth about the SNP is that whenever the people in the United Kingdom vote, they don't give the result the SNP wants, so the SNP goes off in a sulk and wants them to vote again and again and again in the hope that one day they might give the right answer. But life isn't like that. We've had the referendum, and it's all about proper opportunities. If the honourable gentleman is so keen on the European, just look at the spreads on bonds in the Eurozone at the moment. Would you really want to be in an organisation that has that degree of fragility within its bond market?
Last question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his statement. In terms of Northern Ireland, our section on the dashboard should be incredibly simple. The Northern Ireland Protocol has given the EU the final say without any elected input from Northern Ireland. So whilst I welcome the Minister's statement today, I would love to welcome the statement that allows Northern Ireland to operate as part of the United Kingdom in terms of our own legal place. So can the Minister confirm the date for the withdrawal legislation, which I believe that the Minister is very eager to give, but perhaps some fellow colleagues are less so eager?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And Maz, I was sorry not to see the honourable gentleman in the chamber earlier when we unveiled the shield to Sir Henry Wilson. I understand the honourable gentleman was, of course, in Westminster Hall, but it is about the only time I've ever been in this chamber without his beady eye looking down upon me. He is, of course, right. We want the benefits for the whole of the United Kingdom, as his right honourable friend, the member for East Antrim, said as well. This is a United Kingdom activity. The whole of the United Kingdom left the European Union, and we cannot allow Northern Ireland to be a satrapy of the EU.
I thank the Minister for his statement, and we now move to presentation of Bill. Secretary Dominic Raab.
I beg to move.
Bill of Rights Bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Thank you. We now come to the motion relating to the Social Security Additional Payments Bill, allocation of time. Minister to move the motion. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Social Security Additional Payments Bill, second reading.
No.
Thank you. I must inform the House that the reasoned amendment in the name of Kirsty Blackman has not been selected. Minister to move second reading. Secretary of State, forgive me, to move second reading.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that the bill be read a second time. The cost of living challenge facing many families right now is being driven by forces beyond their control. The aftershocks of COVID on global supply chains and Putin's invasion of Ukraine have caused a hike in prices and a spike in bills, particularly for energy costs. As a result, household budgets are being stretched further than at any time in recent memory. So just as we did during COVID, the government is stepping up at this challenging time to help families who are feeling the strain. And it is because we got the big calls right that we have the fiscal firepower to take decisive and direct action to help millions of people across the country. While we have always been clear that the government cannot cover every situation or solve every problem, we are providing financial support to every household to help relieve some of the pressures people are under and help them cut costs across their household expenditure. Approximately 4 in 5 households, or those living in Band A to Band D homes, are receiving a £150 discount on their council tax, with millions already benefiting from that landing in their bank account. And all households that are domestic energy customers will get £400 towards their energy bills this autumn, in the form of a grant with nothing to pay. I won't at this moment in time. We are, however, principally targeting help at those who need it most, helping ease the squeeze for those on low and fixed incomes, who we know spend a higher proportion of their income on energy than average. Give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. And it's on that point of the energy rebate. There is an issue with those people who live in park homes, and I have a few sites in my constituency whereby the energy rebate doesn't make it through to them. Are the government looking at innovative ways of addressing the issues faced by those individuals and households?
Well, my understanding is that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Bays, is aware of this particular channel, and I'm led to believe that there is a solution being developed so that people will benefit from that costs, even if they do not receive that money directly, because most park homeowners, or a lot of park homeowners, don't pay those energy bills directly themselves. But I know that my right honourable friend is aware. Okay. Madam Deputy Speaker, returning to what it is that we're doing to help people, we are providing a direct cost of living payment of £650 to over 8 million families who already get help through means-tested benefits, which we will split into 2 payments of £326 and £324. This includes people on universal credit, income-based job seekers allowance, income-related employment and support allowance, income support, working tax credit, child tax credit and pension credit, both guarantee and savings credit recipients. On top of this, we are providing further help for approximately 6 million people with disabilities on qualifying benefits, with a £150 payment, and over 8 million pensioner households with an additional £300 alongside their winter fuel payment. Combined together, that is extra support of at least £1,200 this year for the majority of households least able to absorb rising costs, and takes our total support package to £37 billion. I give way to the Chair.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. I just wanted to check one point. For working age people receiving universal credit, for example, about 150,000 of them at the moment have their benefit limited by the benefit cap. Am I right that these additional payments are not constrained at all by the level of the benefit cap?
Yes, I can say to the right honourable gentleman that is the case, so, and which I was planning to cover later, but so for the record I will still make that point. I'm actually trying to make some progress here. Madam Deputy Speaker, our Household Support Fund administered through local authorities in England, and the money given to devolved administrations are further avenues for people to seek help with the cost of essentials. And from October, the Government is adding an additional £500 million to this fund, extending support through the winter. Now, in England, that equates to an additional £421 million and £79 million to the devolved administrations. That would take the total funding for this UK-wide household support to £1.5 billion. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful Secretary of State for giving way. One particular group of people who do receive the universal credits, who are in some difficulty, are those who lose some of their universal credits because they have received an universal credit advance for the first 5 weeks. Now, there are 92,000 households in Wales in this situation, getting around £60 per month less, and that comes to a total of about £5 million denied to them. I hope that the Secretary of State is prepared to reconsider her position on this. Obviously, it's not in the bill, so she has taken a decision in the short term, but I would press her to reconsider.
The honourable gentleman is incorrect in saying that money is denied to people. The whole point of receiving an advance is that there's a phasing Instead of, in a typical calendar year, instead of receiving 12 payments, 13 payments are made, and we extended this recently that people can choose to have 25 payments over the 24 months if they so choose as well. So it's not a case that people have been denied. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Social Security Additional Payments Bill before the House today is a short bill of 11 clauses that actually gives us the powers necessary in order to administer these payments to families on means-tested and the disability benefits. As one-off new benefit payments, they will be delivered by the UK Government to eligible households right across the United Kingdom in England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, the timing of such payments will vary, starting with the first payment of £326 for DWP means-tested benefit claimants from the 14th of July, with the second payment arriving in the autumn for those who are eligible. Those on tax credits who do not receive DWP means-tested benefits will get each instalment later so as to avoid duplicate payments. And people who are not eligible in time for the first £326 pound payment because they were not getting a qualifying benefit in the month before the announcement may get the second £324 payment if they have a qualifying entitlement to a benefit in the month before the next eligibility date. Now, we are deliberately not including on the face of the bill the next eligibility date, so as not to try and change claimant behaviour. Instead, there is the power to set a date through regulations. Those on qualifying disability benefits will get their £150 as a single payment from September. Let me just briefly get through some of this. Where eligibility for any of these cost of living payments is found retrospectively, for example, where someone had applied for PIP but had not yet been awarded it, people will still receive that disability cost of living payment just at a later date. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you for giving me way. In the opening of her speech, she was alluding to the fact that 6 million disabled people would be qualifying for this additional disability support payment of £150. Does she acknowledge that there are some disabled people, particularly those in receipt of DLA, PIP or attendance allowance, that no longer qualify for the warm homes discount when the government, her government, changed the rules, will actually be losing out because, in effect, you've taken away that £150 from the warm home discount, and so this additional £50 really doesn't actually do anything to meet some of those extra costs because they've already lost out on that £150 previously.
The reference to the warm home discount is not directly not relevant to this particular bill. I understand the point. It's the policy of my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Bays. But I do know that the intention was there, was recognising. I'm trying to answer the lady's question. Is my understanding is because PIP is not means tested, it's not income based. A decision was made on the warm home discount eligibility to include many more households in that on the basis, as I say, of income base rather than PIP. So that's, I understand, is the policy rationale for that. But I'm sure she will welcome the fact that we have included in this legislation today £150. Madam Deputy Speaker, these one-off tax-free payments do not count towards the benefit cap and will not affect existing benefit awards. They will provide a budget boost for millions of the lowest income households right across the United Kingdom. And this is a government that has supported, no I will not, and continues to support those most in need. And I'm proud of our record of lifting people out of poverty. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, if you listen to opposition parties, you could be forgiven that thinking that poverty was going up. The fact is that in 2021 there were 1.2 million fewer people in absolute poverty before housing costs than when we came into government in 2010. And even in the last year of where we have measures of poverty, whether you choose absolute or relative, between 2019-20 and 2021, every measure saw a reduction in poverty. Now, in terms of statistical poverty measures, on absolute poverty is our preferred measure. Working age people in poverty is down by 100,000, children in poverty down by 200,000, and pensioner poverty down by 200,000. And we know from the latest available data that for most families, the best way out of poverty is through work. Now, in 2019, I won't be taking any further interventions because the Honourable Gentleman has already intervened. I'm sure if he wanted to speak in this debate, he will have put in to speak. In 2019-20, I will shortly. Let me finish this. In 2019-20, children in households where all adults were in work are around 6 times less likely to be in absolute poverty than children in a household where nobody works. And that's why our economic priority during the pandemic was to protect, support and create jobs through the furlough scheme and the many other measures we took as part of our plan for jobs. Give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful. And she'll know, of course, that her figures on absolute poverty and relative poverty are disputed by the various stakeholders who work in this field. But one of the issues which is concerning people with respect to poverty was the failure to uprate benefits this year along the lines of this year's levels of inflation. Now, the Secretary of State has quite rightly said that pensions and other benefits like disability benefits, universal credit benefits, hopefully the minimum guarantee and pension credit will rise in line with inflation this September. She's coming under some pressure on that now. Can she guarantee us that she will not resile from that position?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman may not be aware I cannot make any declaration about the rises in benefits. I can only point to our policy in terms of a triple lock on the on pensioners, and that is because I'm required by law to undertake a review of the benefits once a year, and I have not yet undertaken that review. So I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman will judge us on past performance, especially in following the regular legislation. Coming back to substance, though, I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are at a situation where the unemployment rate is now below the low level we saw before the pandemic, close to the lowest since 1974. And we do have more people on payrolls than ever before. But we're not resting on our laurels, particularly with a record number of vacancies in the labour market. We want people to get into work and to boost their incomes, which is why we launched the Way to Work scheme, quickly connecting claimants with employers looking to fill vacancies, and having turbocharged job centres into almost dating agencies in a way of matching people looking for work to people offering work. I'm confident that we will achieve our target to move 500,000 people into jobs by the end of this month. That is hundreds. I will shortly. There are hundreds of thousands more people benefiting from a pay packet, along with the prospect of a better job tomorrow and a future career. I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Could you just confirm to me that these payments in this bill today to almost 25,000 of my North West Durham constituents are on top of the support which has already been put in place in terms of the £1,000 that families will benefit from the taper rate, the living wage rise, and the £330 that most of them will get in work from the raising the national insurance threshold, meaning that tens of thousands of people in North West Durham will be better off as a result of these changes, which show the actual support that we're providing, just like we did during the pandemic. We're providing it now during this issues of cost of living due to the international factors such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
And is right to point out the additional measures. I don't have exactly how many people in his constituency, but I rely on his excellent local knowledge as a great constituency MP. But absolutely, these are additional measures to what he has already outlined. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill will deliver one-off additional payments responding to the challenges faced by people in every part of our country over the coming months. Now, I do want to thank the usual channels and the House more broadly for agreeing that this bill can make its necessary progress today, and I'm very grateful for that. Its provisions are intentionally straightforward and will enable a straightforward approach for claimants. No complicated forms, no bureaucracy, nobody having to make an additional claim, with payments automatically going into people's bank accounts. The actions from this bill will boost the budgets of millions of stretched families in every part of the United Kingdom, helping them through the cost of living challenge, and I commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Shadow Secretary of State Jonathan Ashworth.
Grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, and let me begin by being clear with the Secretary of State. We do not intend to divide the House. We understand that the government needs to put in place the architecture to make these arrangements swiftly, but nonetheless we do want to put a number of points on record and hope that the Minister, in responding to second reading and throughout the proceedings of today, that we can get some further clarity on a number of issues, because like many members, the message I am hearing up and down the country couldn't be clearer. These are the toughest times anyone can remember for many of our constituents. More than a decade of underwhelming economic growth has meant that today we have the cost of living skyrocketing, pay packets failing to keep pace with inflation. By next April, wages will be worth £2,000 less in real terms than 2020. Real pay in the UK falling at the fastest rate for 20 years, leaving household finances stretched to breaking point. Prices are up in the shops, petrol through the roof, energy bills sky high, and the price cap lifting later this year means that energy bills will go further. Families everywhere are saying enough is enough, and it should be no surprise that the statistics today show a 12% increase in those facing council tax arrears. Now, the Secretary of State in her speech, I thought, took great care to explain why she's taking action to help those in need now, and it is welcome in as far as it went. But I think the House has to understand that the future we are facing is bleak. Cornwall Insight, the energy market experts, is warning that the energy cap could rise by a further £1,000 this October. We've been seen inflation at 9.1% today, with worse inflation on the way. The cost of living will rise rapidly further. Pensioners will see the values of their pensions and savings attacked by inflation. Working families will be left desperate to protect the value of their wages from the ravages from inflation. And the edict of ministers is to tell them to take a pay cut. Now, the hope of ministers is that interest rates and tax increases dampens demand in the economy and thereby will slow economic output. But pain today and pain tomorrow is therefore the policy of ministers to get inflation under control, even though the Office of Budget Responsibility warned following the spring statement that we're heading for the biggest fall in living standards since the 1950s, with more children set to be pushed into absolute poverty. We were clear on this side of the House that taking no action following the spring statement would have amounted to the willful impoverishment of many of our constituents, which a price that we never believe is well worth paying, which is why we did propose a windfall tax on the North Sea gas and oil producers to help families and pensioners, and we are pleased that the government finally listened to our representations after some months. So we recognise that extra support the government is allocating today, but in reality the legislation, as important though it is a short-term sticking plaster because of a series of long-term policy failures to grow our economy sufficiently and address, give me one moment, and address the longer-term problems of hardship that have been growing over the last 10 years because of attacks on social security and unfair pay settlements. The Honourable Gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way. Does he agree with me that missing in the bill is any support for unpaid carers? And does he share my hope that the government will bring forward proposals to help that group of people in the near future?
The Honourable Gentleman anticipates a point I'm going to make, which is why is now a good moment for me to turn to the specifics of the bill, where I want to raise a number of points which I hope the Treasury Bench can address throughout the course of the proceedings this afternoon. In particular, I want to raise points about how the bill impacts on four groups. First of all, the self-employed on universal credit, disabled people and carers, pensioners and larger families. So firstly, on the self-employed who claim the universal credit, the minimum income floor will reduce universal credit payments for some self-employed people to zero. So could the Minister clarify, in responding to the debate, whether self-employed universal credit claimants who UC payments are zero purely because of the minimum income floor will be entitled to these cost of living payments? Secondly, on how this impacts disabled people, the disability charity Sense has warned today of the increasing numbers of disabled people pushed into debt as a result of the rising cost of living. The Treasury bench must surely understand that many disabled people have needs which make heating and electricity to power equipment particularly central to their well-being, so that economising on energy can bring severe hardship. Now, as my honourable friend from Battersea raised a few moments ago, Disabled people on non-means tested benefits will get £150 as a minimum. Indeed, those on means tested benefit will get the £650. But ministers, and I appreciate the Secretary of State says this is a responsibility for the Business Secretary, but ministers did recently change the rules on the Warm Homes Discount Scheme so that 290,000 people on DLA, PIP and AA are no longer eligible. So for people on PIP, this means the government are giving £150 to them after it was taken off them through the changes to the Warm Homes Discount Scheme. This is robbing Peter to pay Paul. It suggests one hand of government doesn't know what the other hand of government is doing. How can this be justified? Of course.
Can I thank my honourable friend? He's making an excellent point and probably articulated it even better than I did. But does he also agree with me, though? The whole premise of DLA, PIP and attendance allowance are to help meet some of those extra costs faced by disabled people. So the fact that the government or the minister has cited that it's a different department, it's Bayes, nonetheless, she must acknowledge the purpose of these benefits. And so actually taking one payment and giving it back with another is actually going to leave nearly 300,000 disabled people worse off.
Is absolutely right, and I can assure you she speaks with an eloquence on these matters that I rarely muster. So, and I thought she put her point powerfully, because even though many disabled people have been given an additional £150, for many of them this will not cover the additional cost of inflation when applied to disability-related benefits. For example, those on universal credit, the supplement for someone unable to work or engage in work-related activity rose by around £240 a year less than if it had been under CPI uprated. And in addition, someone receiving the daily living components of PIP is worse off by £185 on the standard rate and £274 on the enhanced rate as a result of the sub-inflation upratings later this year. It's one of the reasons why many people out there are particularly concerned that the Secretary of State, and I understand that in legislation she has to review these matters, but is particularly concerned that the government may well resile from their commitment to inflation increase benefits and pensions this September. Equally, as the Honourable Gentleman who sits for a Welsh constituency, which I cannot remember the name of the constituency, I'm not sure I can pronounce it either, but anyway, the Honourable Gentleman did say, raise carers allowance. People claiming carers allowance won't get any extra supports, and carers often have higher energy bills because of their caring responsibilities. Yet people in receipt of carers allowance will be people, remember, who provide care for at least 35 hours a week and earn less than £132 a week. These people are therefore likely to be hit hard without additional support. So why were carers left out of this package? Thirdly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to talk about pensioners. We have 2 million pensioners in poverty, and it's rising. The Prime Minister promised pensions would keep pace with wages and prices, but without any thought as to how hard pensioners are finding it to make ends meet, ministers broke that promise, removing the so-called triple lock. That meant a real terms cut of around £500 in the basic state pension, the biggest cut, I believe, real terms cut for around 50 years. Now, I was pleased to see ministers commit to honouring the triple lock for next year, but we can see the pressure ministers are coming under. We hope the Secretary of State doesn't break that promise for the next financial year. But we also do need clarity from ministers on whether the standard minimum guarantee of pension credit will be uprated in line with CPI in September. But because those pensioners on pension credit will be the ones who receive the £650, as she knows. But pension credit uptake is not what it should be. If we could drive up uptake of pension credit, Loughborough University estimates an extra 440,000 retirees could be lifted out of poverty. But with around 850,000 pensioners not claiming pension credit, that is a huge number set to miss out. So failing to do more to increase pension credit uptake could mean that 2/3 of the poorest pensioners will not get an extra £650. Now, I do recognise that the Parliamentary Under Secretary for Pensions, who's not here in his place this afternoon, has been leading a campaign to drive up uptake, even ballroom dancing with Len Goodman. But I would ask the Minister to respond to this point. The impact assessment of the bill, published today by the government, shows that 1.4 million pensioners benefiting, but in the second round, it's estimating 26,000 fewer payments being made to pension credit recipients in the second round of payments. Can the Secretary of State or the Minister, in responding, explain why that is the case and what that says about the success or otherwise of the government's pension credit take-up campaign? And finally, on families. Families with children are poorly served by flat rate payments, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know families with children in the bottom half of the income distribution with 2 or more children spend twice as much on food, essential household goods and services, clothing, footwear and transport. Families with 3 or more children are likely to spend an additional £500 on energy, and the support on offer is not adjusted based on the size of one's family. The cost of living payment, combined with a £150 council tax rate, will indeed provide £1,200 for working-age households in receipt of means-tested benefits. We recognise that. But that won't cover the whole increase in energy bills, especially when further large increases in the price cap are expected in October, as I say, maybe a further £1,000, for example. And nor does it provide much mitigation to wider price food rises either. Let me just spell out. So we know there will be another rise in gas and electricity prices, possibly £800 to £1,000, for a family having already seen an increase of £850. So that family needs to find at least £1,650. They get the council tax deduction of £150. They get the energy bill loan turned into a grant of £400, and they get the £650 paid in 2 instalments, supposedly to cover the year ahead. That's £1,200 in total, but they're still £450 worse off because of the energy price rises this year. And when that comes on top of last year October's £20 a week cut in universal credit, that family's standard of living is down by £1,450 from last year, £28 a week. And this is even before we take into account the increase in food shopping, which Kantar today is predicting the food shopping bill will go up by at least £380. We know the Governor of the Bank of England has been warning of apocalyptic increases in food. So more action is surely going to be needed from the government in the future. Now, ministers retort we're helping families find employment. And indeed, employment should be the best defence from the rising cost of living. But under this government, 8 million people in work are in poverty and picking up food parcels for their family because of low pay and family circumstances. 2 million working families are on universal credit. And indeed, working families on universal credit have actually suffered similar losses to those on out of work. They've lost the £20 uplift. They've seen the real terms cut in universal credit this April. Wages are being outpaced by inflation, even after the national living wage increase. Now, I recognise, of course, as the Minister will respond to me, that the Chancellor did reduce the UC taper rate and increase the work allowance, and those with the highest earnings qualifying for universal credit gained the most from the reduced taper. But for those with very low earnings, the gains were much less than the losses for elsewhere. A lone parent with 2 children is set who would lose £1,200 if they were not working, but would lose £1,300 if they were working 10 hours. They'd lose nearly £700 if they were working 20 hours, £400 if working 30 hours. These families have already lost substantial amounts, and the package the Chancellor has announced does not make up for it. And these examples are not exceptional, Madam Deputy Speaker. They will have a familiarity to every member who speaks to their local food bank or their Citizens Advice Bureau. And the problem is because this flat payment system takes no account of family size or special needs. So I hope that the Minister in this afternoon addresses these points. Because we need more than quick fixes to protect the living standards of our constituents and tackle the chronic injustices of poverty. We entered the living standards crisis not just on the back of years of underwhelming economic growth, but after years of cutting, freezing and restricting access to social security. That left us with a threadbare system and an explosion in food bank, baby bank, bedding bank, fuel bank usage. The real terms value of out-of-work benefits is the lowest for years. We've seen the pernicious two-child poverty, caps on support, inadequate help with housing and council tax, real terms cuts to universal credit, real terms deductions to the amount that people on universal credit are forced to grapple with. And it's why child poverty is rising, on its way to 5 million. 500,000 more children destitute, 500,000 children going without a decent bed at night. The outcry from our communities forced the government to take short-term action, but we need a long-term plan to rebuild social security, grow the economy, raise living standards, to defeat child and pensioner poverty so that the victims of poverty can participate fully in society. That's what I am determined to build.
Order. I have now to announce the result of today's deferred division on the Abortion Northern Ireland Regulations 2022. The ayes were 215, the noes were 70, so the ayes have it. We'll now return to the debate. Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you for calling me so early on in the debate today. It's a great privilege. Now, there will be no surprise that I welcome this bill, which will help millions of families during these very difficult times. Now, I think the party opposite, they think the only way to help families is to just keep increasing benefits. But working class people in places like Ashfield are a little bit more savvy than that. They realise that you make families better off by increasing opportunities through the job market, through education and training, which leads to promotion and better job prospects. But I think for the purpose of this debate, we need to go back in history a little bit, go back to the end of the 90s when Tony Blair came into government, and he introduced something called the tax credit system. And although at the time it seemed an incredibly kind thing to do, the tax credit system, the consequences, well, the unintended consequences we're feeling now, and it's damaged businesses and it's damaged the prospects of millions and millions of people throughout the UK. I'll give you a good example. This is a friend of mine, and she refused to work more than 16 hours for over 10 years because she was a single parent. But this backfired. When her daughter got to 18, my friend lost all her tax credits, a child benefit and a child support. And so now we have a situation where we've got a lady in her 40s and she's just overnight lost half her weekly income. And she's stuck in a low-skilled, a low-paid minimum wage job. And she's never upskilled, despite her employer wanting her to upskill for years and years and years. So she's missed out on that career development, which could have led to a better job and less dependency on benefits, all because she didn't want to work more than 16 hours a week. But this government is trying to fix things like this with the universal credit taper, which will now allow people like my friend all those years ago to work more hours, to get a better paid job and not affect their income as much as it did then. This, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the way that you tackle poverty and help people achieve their goals. But what Labour did, it actually trapped people, millions of people, into just having 16-hour... You can shake your head opposite, and chunt away, but it's true. I know thousands of people, or hundreds of people in Ashfield that were trapped in 16-hour-a-week jobs, and what good's it done them years later? 10 years later, they still are on that minimum wage or living wage job, they're not upskilled, and they've not moved any further, and they've lost all the benefits when the children leave school. That's not progress. It's not progress. The answer that Labour Party had when all these people were stuck on 16-hour jobs and we couldn't get them to work at a full-time job was simple. Their answer was simple. Open the floodgates, import cheap labour, import cheap foreign labour, which is what happened. Then all of a sudden, 20 years later, we've got a failed migration policy, we've got a failed benefits policy, which has led to millions of people being trapped in a poverty cycle. And we've spent the last 12 years trying to put this mess right. And it's not easy when you've got people trapped in a poverty cycle. Lots of them grinning across that side of the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I'm going to crack on. Our benefit system is very generous in the UK, but our workers should... Well, it is generous. The giggling. I'll give you an example. If my friend was a single parent now in Ashfield, with 2 children working 16 hours a week on living wage, she would get £18,000 a year in universal credit, and she would get £6,000 a year, or £7,000 a year wages. That's an income of about £24,000 a year. Not paying any income tax as well, which is a bonus. So to get that sort of job, you'd have to earn about £30,000 a year. That's a good wage in Ashfield. I will give way, yeah.
Very generous. How does it compare to benefits systems across the EU, for example, where it's significantly more generous?
Thank my honourable friend for giving me. I tell you what is generous is a single parent like I was and like my friend was all those years ago, getting 24 grand a year for working 16 hours a week. I mean, she might shake her head, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I think that's a pretty generous payment, not paying any income tax. And, you know, come to Ashfield, ask anybody in Ashfield if 24 grand net is a good income. And you'll be struggling to find people in Ashfield that's earning that sort of income. So, yes, it is a generous income. Now, as we level up in this country, we also need to level up with people's skills who are trapped in this life of benefit dependency caused by the party opposite. And I'll stick to my words. But in the meantime, this is a caring government, and they realise that families do need extra support, which is why we're providing £37 billion to support families. And remember, this is taxpayers' money. There's no magic money tree. This is hard-working people that's having to pay for this. And this bill will ensure swift action by providing the power to make 2 cost-of-living payments very, very shortly of £650 to 8 million households throughout the UK. This is real targeted help for real vulnerable people. There's also the £200 rebate on energy bills. That's been doubled to £400. That's a grant now. That's not being paid back. Living wages up, national living wages up, the UC taper rate is up, national insurance has been cut, so 70% of those who pay national insurance will pay less, and over 2 million people in this country will pay no national insurance at all. And we're doing all we can to ensure that we help keep people's heads above water, but we spend over £80 billion in this country on universal credit and legacy benefits, which now represents 3.8% of our GDP, and we cannot keep asking the hard-working taxpayer to put their hand in the pocket and pay more and more. We must all do our bit. Whilst I welcome this bill to get the immediate support to families, we all must work hard to make sure every single person in this country has the chance to support themselves, and the benefit system should be there to help people in their hour of need and not be a way of life. If it was left to Labour, they would have everyone sat at home feeling sorry for themselves, but I'm different. I want people to have good jobs, earn more money and enjoy the fruits of their labour. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Peace spokesperson Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure to stand here for the SNP today and to speak about the Social Security uprating bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, this was announced by the Chancellor a number of weeks ago now. The Chancellor announced the uprating would happen, having dragged his feet for so long. It took so long for this to happen. He stood up at the budget. He stood up to announce the energy loan that he announced back earlier in the year with a ta-da! Look at this! This is wonderful. We are giving all of this stuff. And it was never, ever sufficient. We called immediately for that energy loan to be made to be a grant, for that energy loan to be increased. We called from the budget when the big announcement was, hey, look, you can have cheaper solar panels. You know, that doesn't help my constituents who are literally unable to buy food. We called for those changes to be made then, and the Chancellor waited and waited and waited until the end of May, when he stood up and made the announcement that this would be coming forward. Now, we've had a few weeks since the end of May. We ended up actually only getting to see this bill last week. Parliamentarians have only been able to scrutinise this bill for a week. It may be that the Secretary of State or the government will say, well, this is because it's a really complicated bill. But there were weeks in advance to decide what that bill would look like. There's been weeks since the announcement to decide what to bring that bill forward and to allow us the opportunity to see it. We should not be doing this in one day. I appreciate the very tight timescale that this has to be put through now in order for the payments to be made. I appreciate that. What I'm concerned about is the time that it's taken up until now, where we have not been able to effectively scrutinise this legislation as it has come through. My other concern about the process, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the issues that there are with the money resolution. This is the tightest possibly drawn money resolution, which means that when we come to committee stage, no doubt the government will be doing as it does in every finance bill, when we get to every finance bill, saying, oh, all the amendments are about having reports. All the opposition want are reports. They don't want actual changes to the bill. Well, the thing is that with such a tight money resolution, it's impossible for us to effectively put forward the asks that we have, to effectively make clear that actually this is very insufficient. We have massive changes that we want to make. But I would like to congratulate, actually, the House on the fact that we're actually, it's very exciting, we're actually debating spend. We never debate spend. It's wonderful. You know, we get the estimates for 5 days a year, or a handful of, is it 3 days a year? A handful of days a year that we are allowed to debate the estimates. We're actually, to be fair, now we are actually allowed to debate spend. But it doesn't happen. We have the budget and then we have the finance bill. The finance bill is entirely about taxation. The finance bill is not about spend. We don't get the opportunity to properly debate and scrutinise spend. So it's very nice to get the chance to actually do so today, albeit with such an incredibly restrictive money resolution, which means that we can't really put forward any amendments that make any sense or actually assist our constituents in any way. Madam Speaker, before I go on, I would like to thank Chris Mullins-Silverstein and Linda Nudge, who have been incredibly helpful in putting stuff together very, very quickly in order for me to be able to make a speech that makes sense today, or hopefully largely makes sense today. The situation that we are in is, as the opposition spokesperson outlined, energy bills are up. On average, they're going to be up in October £1,500 for the average household. That is way more than the amount of money that the government is suggesting that it is providing for people. And that's before you take into account the other increases that we are seeing. That's before you take into account, from ONS figures, pasta is up 50% in price. Bread is up 16%. Rice is up 15%. I'd like to pay tribute to Jack Munro and the huge amount of work that she's done around the Vimes Boot Index, which allows inflation to be measured not just in the way that inflation has historically been measured, but in the way that actually relates to and the way that people buy shopping, the way that people who are on the lowest end of the income spectrum, who count every single penny and have to go to, you know, count all the pennies in the supermarket to work out if they can possibly afford what they've put in their basket. Inflation for those lowest income families has increased significantly more than inflation for those families who are earning more. And actually, it's even worse if you're a disabled household who are seeing even more significant increases in energy bills. The same goes for pensioners on that. Madam Speaker, I'm delighted to hear the member for Ashfield's suggestions that the things are very, very generous. He cannot have the same inbox that I have. The inbox that I have says that things were dire before Brexit. Things were dire before COVID. Things were dire before the massive increase in inflation that we are seeing. And it has only got worse. The impact of Brexit has increased our food prices. That is just the case. The impact of less migration means there's less government money to spend. It is the case that net migration decreases public sector net debt, increases the amount of money that the government has to spend. George Osborne's Red Books will tell you that. From the time that he was Chancellor, explicitly says that in the Red Books, because he was looking to crack down on migration and was making clear, actually, that this would reduce the amount of money that the government had to spend. So it costs money for us to reduce migration. It means we will have less to spend on people who stay here, who live here, who work here. The announcement that this is £37 billion of a package is genuinely a joke. The government, in this £37 billion calculation that they have made, have included the fuel duty changes, right? There's a significant number, especially of my poorest constituents, who don't drive. Absolutely, they're impacted by the price of, you know, supermarket vans having to drive around and small business costs increasing. But it doesn't make a difference to their daily lives. They don't go and fill up their fuel tanks because they don't have fuel tanks. They can't afford cars. So the fuel duty rise, including that in the £37 billion, is ridiculous. Including the freeze on alcohol duty is one of the cheekiest things I have ever seen in this place. And I was here all the way through the Brexit debates that we were having. You can't include alcohol duty freeze and say we're helping with the cost of living. We're helping the poorest people to save money on their alcohol. People who can't afford pasta are not helped by freezing alcohol duty. This is from these things being included is from the government's website, by the way. This is from the government's fact sheet on their website, but the things that are included in the £37 billion. £37 billion also includes lots of already planned stuff. It includes what's happened with the national insurance. It includes things that were put into place when the government thought that increasing benefits by 3.1% in April 2020 was sufficient. It includes a massive chunk of that. The government cannot stand up and realistically say this is a £37 billion package, because it is not. That is not the positive changes that my constituents, people across Scotland, people across the UK are seeing. People who have disabled people, I'm pleased to hear that they're getting an additional amount of money. That is a good move by the government. I'm pleased in that. It does not take into account the increases in the costs that disabled people are seeing. It does not take into account the massive increases in scarcity that there is in things like gluten-free diets. More disabled people have specialist diets than people who will not get the £150 increase. More disabled people spend more time at home. It's the same with pensioners. The increases that are happening for those two groups are not sufficient to cover the additional increases in energy costs, particularly, and in specialist diets that people are facing. Yeah.
Very grateful to her giving way, and I'm listening very carefully to her arguments. She's making some important and useful points, but I have to disagree with her. She cannot honestly stand up there this afternoon and almost just dismiss this enormous sum of expenditure that the government are making and saying that it's not sufficient and that you want more. So perhaps the Honourable Member could explain, where is all this extra resource going to come from? I personally believe that the Chancellor of the Exchequer listened. He took on board the arguments that many of us were making earlier in the year about the rising costs of living, and he has done everything possible to make his pounds go as far as they can in providing relief to those on low incomes.
The Chancellor did listen to the arguments that were made, absolutely, and I absolutely welcome the fact that he came back and said, look, what we did before wasn't enough. Well, I don't know if he actually said that, but said we are going to do more. We're going to bring forward more. We're going to bring forward, and I'm pleased that we are discussing this today. I'm pleased that these increases are happening. I'm making the case that the increases that are being made, the additional payments that are being made in order to cover cost of living, for a start, they don't cover the cost of living increases that there are. I don't think that they are sufficient. I don't think they will assist our constituents who are already struggling. And the Honourable Member is asking about where the money is coming from. We have always said that the windfall tax should be broader than oil and gas companies. We have always said that the windfall tax should be for all of those who made excessive profits during COVID. Why should the Amazons and the Sercos of this world get away with making so much money during the course of the pandemic and not having the government look at that funding? And the reality is the UK government doesn't have to run a balanced budget. You know, that is how the UK government's budget works. It doesn't have to do that, right? The Scottish government has to run a balanced budget by law. The UK government does not. So there is far more flexibility in the budget than the Chancellor explains. And we already had a situation where, when the Chancellor stood up on the 27th of May, he was looking at an additional £30 billion of fiscal headroom compared to his earlier projections. So looking at that additional £30 billion of fiscal headroom in the next few years compared to what his targets, compared to what he'd hoped to get. So there was already extra space before he made the decision to do the supplementary tax on oil and gas companies. So there is money there in order to make the additional payments and the additional requests that we are making today. Madam Speaker, the UK government has failed in a number of places. Here are some of the places that the UK government has failed. The UK government has failed to keep the triple lock for pensioners. The UK government failed to keep the universal credit lifeline. They failed to implement a pension credit take-up strategy. They failed to come forward with cost of living measures as early as they should have during the course of the budget. They have failed to scrap the evil sanctions regime. They've failed to produce a strategy to tackle child poverty. They've failed to bring in a minimum child maintenance payment. They've failed to uprate benefits by anywhere close to inflation this year. They've failed to scrap the rape clause. They have failed to bring in a real living wage that people can actually live on. They've failed to bring forward the long-promised employment bill. They've failed to end DWP's vicious loans clawback. Madam Speaker, in contrast, the Scottish Government, the SNP Scottish Government, running that balanced budget is delivering for people in Scotland. In Scotland, we are mitigating the bedroom tax. We are doubling our game-changing Scottish child payment. We're uprating benefits by double the level that the UK Government are. We are paying carers allowance supplement to people who are carers. We're paying £200 child winter heating assistance to families with severely disabled children and young people. We are increasing our school clothing grant, a school clothing grant that is not available across the board in England and is at the discretion of local authorities here. We are offering 1,140 hours of childcare to all eligible children, no matter their parents' working status. We are providing 5 new benefits worth up to a maximum of more than £10,000 by the time a first child turns 6. This is more than £8,200 more than that provided in England and Wales. We're also providing additional money for subsequent children that is significantly in excess of the amount that is being provided here. So I have some calls for the UK Government. I would like the UK Government to now uprate all social security benefits by 10% and backdate this to April 2020. The Chancellor stood there and said that uprating benefits would have been less than the additional payment that is making. I want him to do both. This is a sticking plaster. Increasing, given this additional one-off payment, does not solve things for next year. It does not undo the fact that this year's increase was woefully insufficient. I'd like the UK Government to make an additional £25 a week, in addition to this, uplift to universal credit and extend it to all legacy benefits to undo the harm that was done by cancelling the £20 a week cut that there was, the £20 a week increase that there was last year. I'd like them to cancel the rape clause, cancel the 2-child limit and cancel the bedroom tax. There is only so much mitigation the Scottish Government can do within our balanced budget. I'd like them to produce a child poverty strategy, make tackling child poverty a national mission, as it is in Scotland. I'd like the UK Government to bring in the long-promised employment bill. They promised 28 times they would bring in an employment bill in the Queen's speech, and no employment bill appeared in the Queen's speech. I would like them to match Scotland's commitment to dignity and respect for those claiming disability benefits. I'd like them to bring in a real living wage and scrap the ageism that there is in the pretended living wage. Madam Deputy Speaker, from day one of the Chancellor's energy loan that he announced earlier this year, we called for it to be a grant rather than a loan. In May, the Chancellor U-turned. He changed it from a grant to a loan, and a loan to a grant, and he increased it like we had asked. Now we must see a U-turn on the 5-week wait for universal credit. We must see that payment become a grant for those who get universal credit. We must not see those payments being clawed back. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK Government has 85% of the powers on social security. They have got all of the powers that relate to energy. They've got all of the powers that relate to minimum wage. They've got all of the powers that relate to national insurance. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have failed. We're being failed time and time again by the UK Government. We have asked for these measures to be devolved. We have amended things for these measures to be devolved. We have voted for these measures to be devolved. We have called on every opportunity for devolution of employment law, for devolution of energy, for devolution over minimum wage, for devolution over national insurance. Madam Speaker, the UK Government refuses. The UK Government is continually refusing and clawing back powers from the Scottish Parliament in their Internal Markets Bill, for example. The Brexit Freedoms Bill is set to remove powers from this Parliament and centre it even more in the executive than it already is. This, Mr Deputy Speaker, is not the way to run a democracy. Mr Deputy Speaker, people are struggling People are struggling today. People are still struggling, even with these payments on the horizon. They are still struggling to see how they're going to get through this year. The only choice for Scotland, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is for us to become an independent country so that we can have the full powers of independence, so that we can protect people, so that we can help them through the cost of living crisis in the way that the UK government refuses to.
Thank you very much. Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased that the bill is in front of us. It's been very clear in the Select Committee in the last few weeks that without a big measure on this kind of scale, low-income families would be in very serious trouble indeed in the coming months. I echo the tribute that's just been paid by the Honourable Member for Aberdeen North to Jack Munro and her campaigning on this, and she gave very compelling evidence to the Select Committee at our meeting on the 9th of March. And the package that's come forward has been widely welcomed. We put out a call for evidence on the cost of living in May. In response, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation said that, and I quote, the package provided much needed support for households which will protect many of them against rising costs over the coming year. Citizens Advice welcomed the targeted support to low-income households and hoped it would, quote, start to reverse the worrying trends we've seen in our data, including record-breaking food bank referrals. Unlike the previous announcements, this May package is properly targeted on low-income families, as it needed to be. The Resolution Foundation described it as offsetting, quote, the poor targeting of previous announcements, and also described it as serious redistribution. It is, I think, a serious response to a serious problem, and I also welcome the Chancellor's change of heart over the windfall tax to fund some of the help that's needed. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we do need to be clear. The reason this bill is needed is because the system for social security uprating has failed. It's a long-standing system. There's nothing new about the way it's done, but the unforeseen burst in inflation means that it simply has not worked this year. And on this occasion, the decision has been taken to replace adequate uprating with ad hoc payments from the Treasury. And that will certainly help us through the next few months. But we need now, I think, to rethink the uprating system to make sure that it doesn't let us down again. The Secretary of State... I'm going to give way to my old friend.
Select Committee Chair, a question. Is he aware that, I think in 1976, the then Social Services Secretary, Barbara Castle, came to the House and uprated benefits and the pension for a second time in the year because of the cost of living crisis then? And actually the policy of the then Shadow Secretary of State, Norman Fowler, was that uprating should take place twice a year. And I wonder if the Select Committee may well consider the arguments that were made in the 1970s.
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point, and the Select Committee will indeed certainly be looking at that. We are conducting an inquiry later this year on the question of the level of benefits, and these issues about how benefits should be uprated will certainly feature. I'm intrigued to learn that the Secretary of State in the 1970s was able to do that, given that we've been told that the IT systems in the 2020s can't cope with it. So we'll certainly be interested to pursue that further. Yes, I'll gladly give way.
Grateful to the right honourable member, the chairman of the Select Committee, for giving way. And this is a really interesting and important point about how we do up ratings. I would urge the right honourable member not to get drawn too far down the path of looking at the system in the 70s. You're talking about very, very different circumstances. There is an issue about the timing of uprating and what figures you are using to calculate. But the bigger issue, the practical issue, I believe, is around the different IT systems, that we still have a plethora of different benefits in play. Does he agree with me that we need to find a way of rationalising that and simplifying that?
I think that would help. I mean, just modernising the old systems would also help, and I do want to say something about that in a moment. But what we're getting is ad hoc payments from the Treasury to sort of tide us over. The Secretary of State has spelt out to the Select Committee, I think rightly, the downsides of one-off ad hoc payments like those that this legislation is enabling. In oral evidence in February last year, she told the committee that there were higher risks of fraud attached to one-off payments and that they can make it difficult for claimants to budget effectively, and both of which I think are quite telling points. She said that one-off payments were not, quote, not one of the department's preferred approaches on providing that financial support. She noted that, quote, there are some challenges about fraud and that there would also be difficulties if people claiming tax credits received a one-off payment and then moved to universal credit shortly afterwards. On the question of what might work best for claimants, she told us that, quote, previous experience would be that a steady sum of money would probably be more beneficial to claimants and customers to help with that budgeting process. And I think she's right. It's not ideal that we've instead got these lump sums being provided by the Treasury. Now, why wasn't proper uprating done in this case? Well, the Chancellor, and this comes to the point that we've just been talking about, the Chancellor pointed out that the fact that legacy benefits are run on antiquated IT systems means that benefits cannot be quickly uprated, the legacy benefits, that is. It takes several months. And he told us that was why he was unwilling simply to uprate benefits. It could have been done very quickly for universal credit, as we discovered in the pandemic, but not for the legacy benefits. Now, in an earlier debate, the Shadow Secretary of State, I recall, brandishing a document from an IT company. I think maybe it was Oracle, the company that provided that document, about the front end that they built for the department's legacy systems, which it was said enabled changes to be made to them much more quickly. And I do wonder whether the Minister, in closing this debate, could tell us what was the truth behind that claim about the front ends that had been provided. I know such front ends certainly have been commissioned by the department over quite a long time, the front ends to legacy systems. And so I would just be interested to know why, notwithstanding what that brandished document said, why it is apparently still the case that uprating takes 4 or 5 months. Are there front ends in place? Why have they not made, apparently, faster changes possible? In our report in June 2020 on the Department's response to coronavirus, the Select Committee recommended an increase in the speed with which changes could be made to legacy benefits. We said this, quote, people will be claiming legacy benefits until at least September 2024, the government's most recent estimate for completing the rollout of universal credit. It is simply not tenable for the department to continue to operate antiquated systems that prevent ministers from making timely changes to the rates at which legacy benefits are paid. We recommend that the department work to increase the speed with which changes can be made to legacy benefit rates. In its response in October of that year, the department said, quote, it recognises the need to be able to respond to events flexibly, which is why we're investing in universal credit, which is more agile than the systems that support legacy benefits, end quote. But while substantial numbers are depending on legacy benefits, the government surely needs to keep the systems that support those benefits fit for purpose. They are clearly not fit for purpose at the moment, and that ought to be addressed. Yes, I'm glad to give
On that note, the new systems that we've created in Scotland under Social Security Scotland are doing exactly as he is asking, and they have got that ability to make those extra payments because we have set up the systems. Does he think that they just need to put some investment in order to sort this for so many thousands of people?
It certainly does need to be done, and I'm pleased to be able to tell the Honourable Lady that the Select Committee will be visiting Social Security Scotland on Monday, and the Vice Chair, who's in his place today, will be part of that group, and we're looking forward to that visit. The reason benefit uprating hasn't worked this year, of course, is the 6-month gap between September, the inflation figure for which forms the basis for uprating the following year, and April, when the increases take effect. In evidence to our call for evidence on the cost of living, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation called on the government to, quote, commit to a much shorter time frame for annual uprating, between measuring inflation and uprating accordingly to ensure benefit uprating genuinely reflects inflation for the year in question. Lloyds Bank Foundation told us, quote, government should consider uprating benefits in line with inflation in the autumn to ensure they more accurately reflect the true cost of living. That sounds perhaps what was being done in the 1970s. The Legatum Institute also suggested reducing the delay between CPI measurement and application of uprating and introducing a mid-year uprating review. Citizens' Advice called for a more sustainable, responsive uprating approach, which means, quote, addressing the lag between benefit uprating decision-making and implementation, and the exclusion of the benefit cap from wider uprating. It says that while the one-off payments to be made under the bill are more generous for some households than if uprating had been brought forward, there are problems. For example, as we've been reminded, the one-off payments are the same amount regardless of family size, a point made by my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State. And they also have cut-off dates which risk arbitrarily excluding people from support. This point about flat rate payments being irrespective of family size does appear pretty unfair to larger families. Overall, the package, I think, is somewhat more generous than early benefit uprating would have been, but for larger families it is less generous, and it's not clear what the justification for that is. The North East Child Poverty Committee told us, and I quote, a flat rate £650 payment for all households on means-tested benefits, regardless of household size, additionally fails to recognise the clear link between family size and essential outgoings, with many larger families already at much greater risk of poverty, a situation compounded by the two-child limit, facing intolerable financial pressures as a result of rising household bills. And I just, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to make one final point. One great advantage of the Chancellor's package for low-income families, compared with a straightforward benefit uprating, and I was grateful to the Secretary of State for confirming that this is the case, is that the benefit cap doesn't apply. It is a very striking thing that when it appears that the headline rate of social security benefits is likely to be raised by 10% plus perhaps next year, there is no indication at all at the moment that the benefit cap is going to be lifted at all. That means that the growing number of families whose benefit has been capped will receive no increase in their income at all at a time when inflation is likely to be over 10%. In its evidence to the Select Committee, the Child Poverty Action Group told us, quote, the government has made a welcome commitment to increase benefits in April 2023 in line with prices. However, not all price-related elements of the system are included in the annual uprating exercise, and the benefit cap means a substantial minority of claimants, an estimated 150,000, will see no increase at all and face another real terms cut to their benefit. At a time, Mr Deputy Speaker, when inflation is so high, the level at least of the benefit cap must surely be reviewed. And I wonder if the Minister, in closing, can give us any encouragement that it will be ahead of April next year. For now, though, Mr Deputy Speaker, and in the context of this bill, it is welcome, I think, and also quite a significant precedent that the benefit cap will not apply to these additional payments, and I welcome that.
Sarah Olney, because she's on my list next. Sorry, Marcus.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's vital that we provide additional support to those in receipt of disability and means-tested benefits who are covered in this bill. But in itself, it's not an adequate response to the depth and breadth of the cost of living crisis that we are currently experiencing. We know that the Chancellor is already hammering families with an £800 tax hike this year, which more than wipes out measures in this bill for those who will benefit from it. We know that the national insurance rise and the freezing of income tax thresholds, which are unfair tax rises, making the cost of living crisis worse for millions of families across the UK by decreasing the take-home pay that employees are earning. Households are facing the highest tax burden in 70 years, and the typical family will see a hit of £1,200 a year through a combination of Conservative Party tax rises and soaring energy prices, according to the Resolution Foundation. We welcome the provisions in this bill that allow for the provision in this bill that creates the £650 payment, but we're calling, instead of it being paid in 2 instalments in July and in October, for it to be paid in full in July, because people need that support right now. But that doesn't mean to say that there might not be more support required in the autumn. The simplest way for the government to help people right now would be to scrap the tax hikes that I've referred to. What we most want to see is an emergency cut to VAT. If we could cut VAT from 20% to 17.5% for 1 year, that would save families an average of £600. It would put money back into people's pockets right now. It would boost the economy. It would support struggling businesses. The OBR forecasts that the Treasury is due to take in an extra £8.6 billion in VAT due to inflation, which is £430 per family. So we think this is something that the government could afford to fund. Cutting VAT would obviously help to address spiralling inflation, as well as keeping costs down for families. We know that a similar VAT cut in 2008 boosted retail sales by about 1% and increased aggregate expenditure by around 0.4%. So that's the difference it could make to struggling businesses right now. And in that same VAT cut in December 2008, inflation fell from 4.1% to 3.1%. And a similar saving right now could make a huge difference to struggling families. What we would also like to see, in addition to the support being announced in this bill, is the government, we know that this targeted support is very, very welcome, but what we really need to see is the £20 uplift to universal credit restored. We accept all of the arguments that that was an emergency measure, but this is also an emergency. The government at the time said higher wages rather than benefit increases are a better option. But I think we've seen just this week the tension that is being caused between this historically high rate of inflation and the pressure that the government would like to maintain, the downward pressure that government would like to maintain on employee wages. This is a debate that's going to be played out in many different circumstances right across the summer and into the autumn. But I think we can see that the government's argument that wage increases are the route to restoring household finances is going to come under some considerable pressure. And so I would encourage the government to think about that £20 a week uplift once more, because it would provide some of the poorest households on universal credit with an additional £1,000 a year. And I think we all know from our postbags what a difference that would make to the very poorest in our constituencies. But much as we welcome the measures in this bill, some of the most vulnerable groups in our society are not going to receive any additional support with the cost of living crisis, thanks to these measures. And that's something that we really do need the government to have a look at again. Several honourable members across the House have already mentioned unpaid carers, and I just want to add our contribution to that. They're once again been forgotten by the government. There's provided no additional support, despite the invaluable role that unpaid carers play. And if you consider the additional pressures that would be on our social care system if they didn't play that role, it is really something that is very difficult to calculate. But as has already been said, they face additional costs as a result of those caring responsibilities. Those claiming carers allowance are being excluded from the list of eligible benefit recipients, and that leaves hundreds of thousands of unpaid carers, including 40% of working age carers in receipt of carers allowance, without any additional support as a result of this bill. And millions of vulnerable adults and children depend upon the efforts of our country's carers. And yet, as we see time and time again, we know that their voices aren't being heard by the government. And again, we see that they are being excluded from support. They're being abandoned by the government. The Liberal Democrats will keep championing the cause of unpaid carers. And I really, really do impress upon the government the need to do more for those families. Again, another point that's been raised by a number of different honourable members during this debate, families with multiple children in poverty. A flat rate payment that doesn't take into account the number of people in a household means that those of larger households, and particularly those with more children, are going to face the squeeze much more severely. And of course, it's much more likely that a larger household will be made up of more children, and therefore it is children who will suffer most from a flat rate payment. And families in the bottom half of the income distribution with 2 or more children spend twice as much on food and essential household goods and services, and clothing and footwear and transport, compared to equivalent families without children. And that leaves larger families in an especially vulnerable position when it comes to the sorts of inflation that we're seeing. Presence of younger children in a family exacerbates the prevalence of poverty due to increased financial pressures that come with caring for a young child. Families with under 5s are therefore especially vulnerable. My team recently met with Little Village, a baby bank that operates mainly in London, who told me they're expecting to support an additional 1,000 families this year, and they helped over 6,000 last year. Families cannot just go along to their banks, they have to be referred by education, health and social care professionals. So these are only the families that have been detected by authorities as being most in need. So we know that the real impact of the cost of living squeeze on families with young children is likely to be much more widespread. And Little Village told me about stories of families. Pregnant women are skipping meals in order to feed their toddlers. They're cutting toes out of their baby onesies to avoid having to buy new ones. This is what families are already having to do to meet the cost of living crisis. And we know that the total number of children in poverty is predicted to rise to 5.2 million by 2023-24. That's an additional 1.1 million additional children. We really do need to do more to recognise the size of households that are being targeted by some of this help. I want to mention also rural communities and rising fuel prices. We want to see, Liberal Democrats want to see an expansion of the Rural Fuel Duty Relief Scheme, which is currently only in a handful of remote areas of the UK, but we know that from right across the country, the current huge price rises in petrol is having a disproportionate impact on those areas that cannot switch to public transport, particularly the most rural areas. And we think that the government should immediately think about extending the Rural Fuel Duty Relief Scheme because where public transport options are limited. This would include Devon, Cornwall, Shropshire, Cumbria, some parts of Wales, and double the relief to 10p a litre. We are seeing real impacts on the rural economy because people are limiting how much they're driving. And that is having a real impact not just on local businesses and the rural economy, but young people accessing educational and employment opportunities. This is something the government really must address as a matter of urgency. I just want to take the opportunity to raise the case of one of my constituents, a lady called Edna Price. Edna lost her right arm in a horrifying industrial accident some 45 years ago now, and has been living... most of her income since then has come from her industrial injuries compensation fund. But this is not a qualifying benefit. And this, for Edna, causes a number of practical everyday problems. The income that she earns from that is not large, but because it's income from this particular source and not from pension credit or a qualifying source, she misses out regularly on some of the other non-financial benefits that are offered to people who are on qualifying benefits. I have written to the department about Ms Price's case, and I would really welcome the opportunity to speak further to the Minister, because Edna, again, was going to miss out on this benefit, even though she struggles to afford her fuel bills already. And this is, I would very much welcome the opportunity to talk to the Minister further about how my constituent on her industrial injuries compensation can potentially qualify for some of these other targeted benefits. I am pleased that the Chancellor is using the social security system to target this payment to households most at risk of hardship. And I do want to make the point again, it's a much more effective method compared to the use of council tax banding to calculate who was eligible for a rebate. In my constituency, Richmond Park, I think we have, out of all constituencies in the UK, the 6th highest average house price, which causes those residents in my constituency who live in social housing quite a few issues because they themselves are on very low incomes, but the properties that they live in can often attract quite a high council tax band valuation, not least because obviously these valuations were done back in the early 90s on much narrower value bands than I think we would think about using if they were to be done again today. And so too many of my low-income constituents are living in houses that don't qualify for the council tax rebate, particularly a number of socially rented homes in the Kingston Borough part of my constituency. When they were valued back in 1991, they were assigned a market value based on the privately sold homes around them. And I'm thinking of a particular estate in North Kingston, which very small homes, but house particularly vulnerable people, but they have been valued too high in order to qualify for the council tax help with fuel bills. And if there is anything that the Minister can say in his summing up, or that we could hear from in due course from the Chancellor about how that could be addressed, I would be very grateful, because I wrote to the department on this issue back in March and I haven't had a response. As I say, in a constituency like mine with high housing values, it is a big issue for my low-income constituents. So I'd just like to close by saying we obviously welcome the measure in this bill, but there is still so much more to do and so much more that the government can do, not just in spending, but in thinking about the way it identifies those people who are in need of assistance that the government can do, and I welcome the opportunity to hear more about those in due course. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that, Mr Mills, having to wait, but Nigel Mills.
I'm grateful, Mr Deputy Speaker. I wasn't planning to speak, but I've been tempted to say a few words. I think, firstly, because there's a danger in a debate, actually, where we're spending billions and billions of pounds, and we've got quite a small audience, that you kind of think this is a small, insignificant thing, but perhaps not one of the biggest spending items the government's tried to do on rush legislation probably in history. And I think we should actually genuinely recognise that the government have responded to a probably is an unprecedented crisis in a very generous and very creative way. And probably those of us who have been wrestling with this for the last few months, I think probably almost the same crowd were here for the benefits uprating debate in February, where we were pleading for more help and the government to go for more generous uprating. I don't think we could ever have believed at that point we would see support of this level and this ingenuity being provided, given all the financial turmoil the country's been through in recent years. So I think we do genuinely have to give the government real credit for what they've tried to do to help people through what we all hope is a relatively short-term blip rather than a long-term sustained problem. And that certainly seemed to be the plan when we had the original £150 through council tax and the £200 loan via your energy company. We were hoping it was a few months of a spike we could get people over and then things would go back to normal. We have to recognise now that that's not likely to be the case. We're going to have a much higher rise, and it may well be sustained for a longer period unless some very happy events happen around the world and it starts to reverse more quickly than anybody seems to think it will. But that, I think, is where the government need to just think for the next few months about what they're trying to do and where they're trying to get to, because it may well be the strategy is that we can pass this money out in this way on one-off basis until we get to the up-ratings for next year, and then we hope the up-ratings will have taken into account inflation, and therefore people's income from benefits and pensions will then match the raised outgoings, and we've solved the problem. I'm not convinced that's going to be the case if inflation remains at 9 or 10% for a long period. Because, what we'll be doing in April is giving people inflation based on the year to September 2022, and there could be another 5% of inflation before we get to March. We may well be back in this position in a year's time. So I think it would help the government to come out with some clarity as to what the long-term plan is here. And I think it leads us back to the idea we've been calling for as a Select Committee and others for quite a while. The government need to go and do some work to rebase benefits and make sure that benefits for key household compositions are actually providing enough to actually meet the cost of living, and therefore that the increases will maintain that situation. Otherwise, there is a danger, actually, that we get to the next financial year and we'll give an up-rating which won't be enough. And we'll actually be giving people in with the up-rating less than they've had this year, with this year's benefits plus the one-offs. And people will be worse off in a year's time, even though the benefits have gone up, because they haven't gone up by quite enough. And we'll be back in a similar crisis needing more one-off payments in the next financial year to repeat the ones we've had in this financial year, and that doesn't strike me as being a long-term sustainable way of running a welfare system. So I would certainly say, huge congratulations to the government for what they've done here to get us through, or at least hopefully through, this problem. But I think they now need to step back and work out what the long-term sustainable way of delivering welfare at a level that meets the essential living standards we expect it to is. I don't think we can get there by haphazard one-offs and increases that aren't actually based on the real-term inflation that you've got at the time you make it. And perhaps that is where a second uprating in a year may be one way of mitigating that. And actually, it would probably help the government, because actually if you uprate benefits, something you see will taper, so not everybody will get the full amount of the absolute amount you give. So you may well find actually there's a bit of a cost saving. Or you could use that to be more generous at the lower end of the earnings spectrum and less generous at the higher end by making use of the taper. So you could have a higher base amount, accepting that some people wouldn't get the full amount. So I'm not sure we're necessarily asking for huge amounts of extra spending there, just probably a more targeted and better use of the systems that we have in place. It is interesting, actually, that the answers we got in February were we couldn't possibly use any inflation number less than 6 months old because the systems couldn't cope. And yet we appear to have now managed to come up with some of these ideas in late May and actually make the first payment to people about 7 weeks later in the middle of July. Now that suggests to me that when there's a will and a desire, things can be done at less than 6 months' notice. And hopefully that will be built upon when we get to next year's uprating, and we can at least try and creep the inflation number from September to December, so it's only 3 months out of date by the time we get there. I just say, actually, on the ingenuity point, I mean, I think the one-off helps the government are giving and now involve a payment by councils reverse engineering the council tax system, effectively a payments by energy companies for what was the loan and is now the gift, a payment through the welfare system, a payment through the tax credit system, and a payment I think is a winter fuel allowance being increased for the year. Now that's quite a creative way of spreading the workload to get all these payments made, but it produces a very complicated system where people don't really understand what help they've got from who and why and when they should have had it and if they've had the right amount. I would perhaps hope now we have some more time to plan this, that if we get any, I hope we don't need them, but if we need them, we ought to have them. If we get any future rounds of this, can we find a way of it being done through one mechanism, or at least one for benefits and one for pensions, rather than a multitude of things that risk people missing out because they just don't know who they should be checking and claiming and chasing. And actually it will be far more beneficial to my constituents if they do get the first of these payments in the middle of July, because sadly many still haven't had the £150 through the reverse running of the council tax system because the council haven't yet got the approved form they can put on their website for people to fill in, so they can't make the payments for the ones who don't pay by direct debits. People are still not receiving the support we wanted them to have in April. It will still be a good few weeks before they get there. So just to conclude, I think there is very, very much to be welcome here. I don't think we should be mealy-mouthed in our praise for the government. This is exceptional support at an exceptional time. But hopefully we can do what we did through the pandemic, and we can rush things out at the start, and then we can think them through and get better systems if we have to do a rerun of this as the crisis continues.
Wind-ups, Karen Buck.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's been a short but useful debate, and of course, as we have said, we will not be opposing or seeking to delay these payments. Any measures that put money into the pockets of people on low incomes is to be welcome. But I think it's important, as we've heard during the course of the debate, that we also put on record some of the concerns about the way in which this has come about, this particular situation has come about. It's a cost of living crisis that is hammering millions of people across the country, but the fact is it's coming on top of 12 years of a living standard squeeze for those who at various points have needed to draw on social security to support their incomes. We did we went into the pandemic with child poverty rising on the relative poverty measure. For larger families, it's even on the government's preferred measure of poverty, which is the absolute poverty measure. Those larger families are deeper into poverty. And that is a consequence of years and years in which various parts of the social security system, tax credits and universal credit were either frozen or uprated by only 1%, and that of course is also before the impact of various caps and deductions are taken into account. And the fact that the social security system was in such a poor state in 2020 was exactly why the government felt it had to respond by introducing the £20 uplift. And of course what we saw was that the £20 uplift, when we looked at the poverty statistics from this spring, we saw that that had an impact. Although, of course, it is true that we want as many people as possible to do well in employment, to see their real wages rising, and obviously to be to not have to draw on means-tested benefits as far as possible, it is absolutely the case for many people, particularly families with children, that they need that support, and where that support is adequate, it makes a real and profound impact on child poverty. And we are now, of course, after having lost that £20 uplift last autumn, in the midst of a sudden and dramatic surge in inflation. CPI now 10 times the level that it was in the spring of 2021. And that has left, again, as we have heard, a very large portion of the population struggling with their bills, but particularly those on the lowest incomes, facing the actual lived choice between having to put food on their tables, between eating as a parent and letting their children eat, heating their homes when it is cold, covering their rent, putting school uniform onto their children's backs, and other essential costs. And of course it remains true that if you are on a low income, then your costs are higher. And as we know, but is not built into government policy, the poorest pay a premium for their goods and services, and face the highest inflation levels. And as a consequence of all of these measures, and the loss of the £20 uplift last year, the number of children living in poverty will be higher when we come to measure that next year than it was this year, because of changes in government policy. At every stage in this, the government has been on the back foot. They have been running to catch up. And we heard, I think that was powerfully made, both by my honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee, and for the member for Amber Valley, because we are now in a situation where, when we were discussing the uprating statement already in the context of rising inflation, we were discussing the possibility of benefits being able to be uprated at a level that was more more up to date with what was actually happening in the real world of price rises, and found that that couldn't happen. We had a set of measures that included the assistance with council tax, which was a poorly targeted and difficult to administer measure, and of course then only weeks later the government had to come back with an even larger package of measures than would have been the case. If the government had been able to update the social security this spring more in line with actual inflation, although there absolutely undoubtedly would have been a need for additional assistance, it wouldn't have been the same level of emergency package that we are now facing. And importantly, and I think this is a very central point to the whole debate, families would have had, well, pensioners and families would have had the income in their pockets week by week in order to be able to plan and manage their finances. And that is undoubtedly a better way for households to cope with rising crises than the number of single one-off and emergency payments, as we've heard, coming in from different angles, different sources, and requiring that to be managed. And families, of course, because they didn't get that assistance in April, even though it is only a few months later, before these first of these payments will be made, many of those families will have found themselves in debt. They will have found themselves in financial difficulty in the interim, and the debt that families get into is itself expensive. And I think there's not many members of this place who haven't been dealing with constituents who have come to them facing bailiffs at their door, facing being caught in payment schemes that have left them struggling with very high repayments because of the difficulties that they've got into. It is simply not the case, Mr Deputy Speaker, that one-off payments were the only way of delivering timely support to families on means-tested benefits. We do need to be, I think, clear that whilst welcoming, as I've said, any support, and it's a large package of support that we are considering today, that this approach is still going to lead to a lot of rough justice, which would have been mitigated had a broader package of support been put in place when there was still time through the mainstream social security system. Entitlement to the one-off payments is triggered by receipt of one of the means-tested benefits in the month leading up to one of the qualifying days. This means that it is people's circumstances in just 2 months of the year that are taken into account. So families who have the same income and face the same cost of living pressures over the course of the year could wind up being treated very differently depending on what point of the year they are dipping into an application to a means-tested benefit. Some will receive the additional support and some won't. And of course the problem is that people's circumstances do change all of the time, not just in 2 months of the year, and the numbers involved are very large. For example, every 3 months about 1 million people of working age leave employment, becoming unemployed or economically active. At the moment, an even larger number move into employment, but it's the scale of the churn rather than the net outcome that is important here. Similarly, there are about 150,000 starts on universal credit every month, the great majority of them due to changes in family circumstances. So with families moving on and off benefits the whole time, a one-off payment that is tied to just 2 dates in the year is inevitably a cruder approach to matching funding to need. And I'm particularly concerned about how people with fluctuating incomes will face it under this policy. The Act provides that only people in receipt of a benefit payment of at least 1 penny in the month leading up to the qualifying day are entitled to the one-off payment. But universal credit is supposed to adjust to fluctuations in income on a monthly basis. Some people will be entitled to no payment in 1 month and payment in the next month depending on their earnings, which was indeed one of the universal credit selling points, that people would not have to make a new claim every time their earnings fluctuated above and below the cut-off level. So it seems inevitable that large numbers of people, employed and self-employed, with low and irregular incomes, will be denied help under this policy in a completely arbitrary way. Government needs to clarify what steps it intends to take to mitigate this risk. Is it really necessary to insist that only people who have actually received a payment in the month leading up to the qualifying day should receive help? Should all self-employed people whose universal credit is reduced to 0 in one of those periods, solely due to the operation of the minimum income floor, be excluded from support? We've also heard about the limitation of these measures in terms of adjusting to family size, and of course that is one of the critical ways in which delivering directly through universal credit and indeed legacy benefits was preferable and was more sensitive to the needs of families. The fact is that emergency and one-off measures such as this do have a place in exceptional circumstances, but they don't give people living desperately precarious lives the security they need. They don't, in many cases, match the individual circumstances that the social security system, however imperfectly, does. Any and all measures that help us to relieve hardship in these difficult times are welcome. But overall, our social security system needs to be more fit for purpose, just as the wider economy needs to be more fit for purpose, more resilient, more productive, with decent and secure employment opportunities and investment in the future.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank those who've contributed in this debate today, and I'd like to echo the points that have been made by the Secretary of State, my right honourable friend, to stress the importance of this urgent legislation to support people up and down the country. The sharp increase in the cost of living is a challenge shared across the globe due to the aftershocks of COVID on global supply, which have been amplified by Russia's unacceptable invasion of Ukraine. This bill is the flagship component of our bold package of cost of living additional payments, which have been designed to help people cope with these increased costs. We're grateful for the support of the opposition frontbench in facilitating speedy progress of the legislation. It's vital that these payments get to the people that need them. And I'm also very grateful to the contributions that have been made that have highlighted that these are a serious response to serious challenges that have been made by the Chair of the Select Committee, the Right Honourable Member for East Ham, and also by my right honourable friend, the Member for Brizzelly, Pembrokeshire, and indeed my honourable friend, the member for Amber Valley. The support being provided through this bill is timely and comprehensive, and we're taking significant steps in targeting resource to support those in greatest need. The spirit of this bill is in line with the approach the government has taken since the start of the pandemic, which has been shown to deliver for the people of this country during challenging times. We'll continue to work hard to help people on low incomes get the support that they need. We've worked hard through the vaccine rollout, through the dedication of amazing people to reopen society, and our economy has responded positively. There are record numbers of people in payroll employment. Unemployment is just 3.8%, which is around the lowest level since the 1970s, and there are 1.3 million vacancies, which we're working diligently with employers and communities to fill. And my honourable friend, the member for Ashfield, will be pleased to know that, given his focus on work. With all the work that's going on to help get people into work and progress in work, we recognise that people do need support, additional support, in dealing with the cost of living challenges. And that's why the Chancellor has set out his generous package, another £15 billion of targeted support, which bring our total package to £35 billion this year alone. These additional payments are made up of a particularly important one, means-tested benefits, which will provide £650 one-off cost of living payment, and that'll be paid in 2 instalments to recipients entitled to the qualifying means-tested benefit or tax credit. The first starting from the 14th of July, and then the second, £234 later in the year. The honourable member for Richmond Park asked that this could be made in one payment. I understand the point she makes, but the reason we've consciously staggered these payments is to help people in low incomes with their budgeting, and I hope she'll welcome that as well. The other important element of this bill is providing disability cost of living payments of £150. This will go to 6 million people in the United Kingdom and will be paid in September. We've deliberately kept the rules of the additional cost of living payments as simple as possible, because that is the way we can ensure we can develop the systems and processes required to make these payments at pace. And I'd like to pay credit, Mr. Deputy Chairman, Speaker, for the hard work of the officials across government and the work they're doing to make this possible. There are a number of contributions which I need to respond to in the debate. One was around the benefit cap, raised by the Honourable Member for East Ham and by Honourable Member for Leicester South and also for Amber Valley. We've kept these payments very simple, both for those receiving the payments and for government systems. They're tax-free. They won't impact on benefit entitlement or the benefit cap, and they'll be paid to people without the need for paperwork. It'll be paid into people's bank accounts. The Honourable Member for Aberdeen North made points as well about uprating. And of course, as the Secretary of State said in her contributions at the start of the second reading debate, there will be an annual review of benefits and of pensions for the tax year 23-24, and that will commence in the autumn as per convention. Some people have highlighted, some honourable members have highlighted legacy systems and pensions and why can't we do uprating more frequently. But I think we know that the legacy systems are not that agile. And of course, what we're trying to do and working very hard to do is recognising how flexible universal credit is and how resilient it's proven through the pandemic to move people through to universal credit by the end of 2024. I will on that point, but I will need to make progress quickly.
I'm grateful. I just wanted to go back to what he was saying about the benefit cap, and I welcome the point that he's made. Does he recognise that in a very high inflation environment, there really is quite a compelling case for looking again at the level of the benefit cap for next year alongside the other benefit uprating matters?
I think the Right Honourable Member made that point in his remarks as well. I was just going to come on to that particular point too, because there is a statutory duty to review the benefit cap levels at least once every 5 years, and this will happen at the appropriate time when the Secretary of State decides to undertake that review. She'll consider the national economic situation and any other matters that she considers relevant at that particular moment in time. Further points have been made about carers allowance. I just want to reiterate that carers allowance is not a means-tested benefit. Nearly 60% though of working age people on carers allowance will get the cost of living payment as they're on means-tested benefit or disability benefits. Carers allowance recipients will benefit from the £400 per household universal support being provided to help with the cost of energy bills. And people who receive carers allowance may live in a household that will benefit from the government's package of support. For example, they may live with someone who receives a means-tested benefit, disability benefit or tax credit, and if so, the household will benefit from the cost of living payment. Points were made by the opposition front bench, and particularly from the Honourable Member for Westminster North, who has raised this issue with me on a number of occasions in different debates around why this couldn't better reflect or more fully reflect different family size and formation. The challenge here is trying to get these payments out as fast as possible. And so to do that, we need to get it out to single benefit units as they're described to households. The important thing to highlight is that most families who are low income will be able to receive the £150 council tax benefit support and also the energy bill support on top of the taper and work allowance and also the increase in national living wage as well. Points were made about fluctuating earnings. It's not possible to distinguish between those that have permanent increases in their earnings and those whose earnings are temporarily fluctuating. If a UC claimant's income subsequently falls, these claimants will return to having a positive award after the cut-off date and may be eligible for the second payment. I remember that the Honourable Member for Leicester South also talked about the minimum income floor. We do have a minimum income floor so that we do not prop up unproductive or self-employment indefinitely. We have a start-up period to protect newly self-employed people. Beyond that, having a minimum income floor is the right policy. And if that means that there is a nil universal credit payment, then yes, it means that they would not be entitled to the means-tested benefit. However, they would get the £400 energy payment, £150 council tax, and also would be eligible for the household support fund, potentially. And it's worthwhile recognising that there are paid employment opportunities out there, given the high level of vacancies as well. Points were made about the pension credit take-up. Well, I'm sitting next to the expert here, who, well, twinkle toes or whatever we want to call him. He'll take this forward with aplomb, that is for sure. But there was a serious question made as well as this about why the number of recipients for the means-tested benefit cost of living payment fall in the second payment period. And that's because the projections reflect mortality rates. However, they do not reflect the important work that many of us are doing to raise awareness of this. So hopefully there'll be many more people that do. I think we've hit most of, or answered most of the questions that have been raised. I think the Honourable Member from Richmond Park asked questions about the industrial injuries disablement payment benefit. I'd be more than willing to talk to her separately about that. But all I would say is that we shouldn't underestimate the fact that we do have the Household Support Fund, additional payments that have been made to help people with the cost of essentials. So there's another £500 million that has been made available through the Chancellor's latest statement that will be made available from October this year in 22 through to March 23. In England, that will be the Household Support Fund. That will be £421 million, which is administered by local authorities, and then devolved administrations will receive £79 million again through the Barnett formula. And the point I'd just like to make on this, it's an important one, is that there will be new guidance for local authorities for this latest extension of the Household Support Fund to help reflect the fact that there may be some people who are not able to secure these additional payments, and they will be able to go to the councils locally to secure support in this way. I will on that point.
Specifically on the Household Support Fund, some of the Household Support Funds ran out months before they were expected to last. Does he think that the new levels of Household Support Funds that are being put in are going to be sufficient and are going to last as long as they're supposed to last?
This current tranche of Household Support Fund is on top of all the other benefits we've talked about here. So as we said, these are substantial support payments that are being made available, these additional payments. And the £500 million on top is there to help those people who have further needs with cost of essentials. And there will be further guidance made available. Let me just conclude, Mr Deputy Speaker. We're working at unparalleled pace to get money into people's pockets. It's absolutely vital that we meet the deadline for royal assent by the 30th of June after a fast-track passage without creating a strong risk that we will fail to make payments in July. We want to make sure that the most vulnerable people in our society, people on low incomes, people with disabilities, get the payments and support that they need. And as I've highlighted already, this payment package in total comes to £37 billion this year alone. This bill helps to deliver key elements of this support package to those that need it most. That is why I strongly support its measures and commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Does another say aye? Aye. Actually, no, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Money motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order papers, may another say aye? Aye. No, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Social Security Additional Payments Bill Committee.
Now.
Order. I'm just going to say minister because I don't know which one I'm going to stand.
She's got to read the title again.
Yeah, I've got to say order first.
Yes.
Order.
Social Security Additional Payments Bill.
We're going to begin with Clause 1 stand part, with which it will be convenient to consider the other clauses and new clauses as listed on the selection paper. The question...
Front bench, with your permission, to move as fast as we can through this committee stage. If I may start with Clause 1 and move this. Clause 1 will ensure that the £326 and £324 cost of living payments totalling £650 will be made to an individual or a couple who have a qualifying entitlement to a social security benefit or tax credit. This clause also sets out the qualifying benefits and also the qualifying tax credits as well. And where a claimant is entitled to both a qualifying social security benefit and tax credit, the social security benefit will be the qualifying benefit for the purpose of receiving a cost of living payment. Moving to the second clause, this sets out who is eligible for the two payments that make up the £650 cost of living payment. This clause ensures that only those with the entitlement to a positive payment or award in respect of the passporting social security benefit or tax credit will receive a cost of living payment. The aim is to ensure that we target payments to those on the lowest incomes. The clause also defines the relevant eligibility period in relation to the qualifying days as set out in Clause 1. Give way.
He'll be aware that there are some situations where an employer pays a month's wages late, or they're on a 4-weekly cycle and you get 2 payments in a month rather than 1, or a one-off bonus is paid in a month. And that means that somebody who ordinarily gets a UC payment in a month has a month where they're entitled to nothing. And if that happened to be the month that was used for the qualifying payment in this situation, they'd miss out on the whole £326. Was he tempted, or would he be tempted, before it goes to the Lords, just to perhaps use a 2-month period for that? So if somebody gets at least a penny in either of those 2 months, they did get the £326 rather than risk these sort of strange one-offs that seem to happen and wipe out somebody's monthly payment.
I understand the point that he makes. We've already talked about fluctuating earnings. The important thing here is that we've had to define these eligibility periods to be able to get the payments out speedily. And we've also made sure there's a protection mechanism for those. Well, first of all, there's a wider package of support that's available other than just the £650 cost of living means-tested benefit. And there's also the further funding of the Household Support Fund that will help these individuals. As we move forward into Clause 3, this addresses a situation where a person has a qualifying entitlement to a social security benefit or a tax credit more than once. And this clause ensures that where the person is entitled to both universal credit and another social security benefit, they will receive the cost of living payment as a result of their entitlement to the universal credit only. Where a claimant is entitled to both a qualifying social security benefit and a tax credit, the social security benefit will be the qualifying benefit for the purpose of receiving a cost of living payment. Where a person is entitled to both child tax credit and working tax credit, but not a qualifying social security benefit, they'll receive the cost of living payment as a result of their entitlement to child tax credit only. This will ensure a person does not receive duplicate cost of living payments irrespective of whether or not they have a qualifying entitlement to more than one passporting social security benefit or tax credit. In terms of clause 4, this places a duty on HMRC to make a cost of living payment to people whose entitlement to qualifying tax credits only becomes apparent at a later date. This clause will ensure those people will not miss out, which is a point that's been raised by others in this debate so far. In clause 5, this places a duty on the Secretary of State to make a disability cost of living payment of £150 to 6 million people who receive an eligibility benefit in respect of the 25th of May 2022. This disability cost of living payment will support disabled people with additional costs they may face, and this clause also sets out the eligible benefits or the qualifying benefits for this particular additional payment. To be eligible, the person must have been entitled to a payment of one of these benefits in respect to the 25th of May 2022. Clause 6 confirms that the administration rules used for each cost of living payment are the same as the benefit or payment that conferred the eligibility. And in clause 7, this provides for cooperation between the Secretary of State, the Department for Work and Pensions and HMRC in the delivery of cost of living payments. The scale and scope of the measure also requires collaboration with other colleagues across government, and together the bodies that are set out in this clause ensure that the intended recipients of the cost of living support are paid. There is a need to have data sharing to minimise the risk of duplicate payments and to support operational delivery. Clause 8, this states some important points have been raised in this particular debate already in the second reading. It ensures that the cost of living payments are disregarded for the purposes of tax and social security. I can confirm that the cost of living and the disability cost of living payments are exempt from tax. The payments will not affect a person's entitlement to social security benefits or tax credits, either as capital or as income. I can also confirm that the payments will not be subject to the benefit cap. I will.
When he says they'll be disregarded as capital, does that mean if somebody quite prudently puts the money in the bank and saves for their higher energy bills in winter, that wouldn't take them over the £16,000 savings limit for universal credit? That would effectively, they could ignore not just the receipt of the income, but they could ignore them for that part of their savings as well if they were to treat them that way.
Minister? Just to clarify, yes, which is an important thing, because what this clause ensures is that every person who is entitled to a cost of living payment receives every penny, just as all members across the Chamber today will want to see. Clause 9 sets out the definition and interpretation of certain terms used in the bill. Clause 10 explains the procedures for laying the regulations previously referred to under the powers contained in Clause 1. 4 to specify the regulations for the qualifying day for the second cost of living payment, which will be no later than the 31st of October. And Clause 6.5 to apply and disapply regulations around the administration of payments, including overpayments and recovery, as is required. These provisions ensure that regulations made in this bill can enable the efficient delivery of the second payment in the autumn. And the final clause is Clause 11, which defines the territorial extent of the bill. The provisions of this bill extend to England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. This ensures that these payments will be payable across the whole of the United Kingdom. With your permission, I would like to now turn to the new clauses 1 to 4, which have been grouped, laid by the honourable members for Leicester South and Edinburgh West, respectively. The new Clause 1 appears to require the government to publish analysis of the impact on household incomes of an earlier backstop date for the second qualifying day, no later than the 1st of October. For clarity, I want to assure honourable members that the bill does not set out the qualifying date for the second payment. Instead, the bill sets out that the Secretary of State will lay further regulations to specify the eligibility dates for the second cost of living payment worth £324, and that the date selected for this will be prior to the 31st of October. As previously stated, announcing the qualifying date for the second payments now would risk increasing the level of fraudulent applications to benefits and disincentivise reporting of changes of circumstance. Turning to new clauses 2 and 4, these appear to require the government to publish analysis evaluating the impacts of the payments provided under the bill on households. The Treasury has already published detailed analysis of the impact of the May and February support packages. Its distribution analysis document shows that the support packages are highly progressive, a point that's been made earlier in this debate, I think on both sides of the Chamber, with lower income households benefiting significantly more than higher income households, both in cash terms and as a share of income. As a result, further publications are not necessary. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that the government support means on average, the poorest households will be approximately compensated for the rising cost of living this year. The Resolution Foundation also said that the May 2022 support package is highly progressive, with households in the bottom quintile seeing an average cash gain of £1,195. Lastly, new clause 3 requires the Secretary of State and HMRC to attempt to make all payments covered by this bill before the 14th of July 2022. This does not acknowledge the deliberate staggered nature of the cost of living payments and disability cost of living payment. Paying the cost of living payment in 2 instalments is a key safety net in the policy to support households most vulnerable to the rising costs with budgeting, as I've said previously. This approach also ensures that any new eligible claimants will benefit from the second payment worth £324, even if they're not paid the £326 payment. It would also not enable people to be paid when they become retrospectively eligible. Furthermore, the new arrangements required for all the payments would not simply be deliverable by the 14th of July. Therefore, this new clause would result in payment errors, which may then need to be recovered. This would cause distress or confusion for the recipient and be a large extra cost to the taxpayer. Given the published distribution and analysis of the impact of the announcements already exists, and that new clause 3 would threaten successful delivery of the payments, I therefore hope that honourable members will withdraw these new clauses. Thank you.
Shadow Minister.
Very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thank the Minister for that introduction, and there is clearly no need to cover the points that we have discussed during this second reading, but I would just like to make a few comments in respect of new clauses 1 and 2. As he has stated again, the bill as drafted states that the second qualifying date is to be set no later than 31st of October. That does allow for a span of several weeks during which that qualifying date could be set. The Secretary of State in her introductory remarks talked about the need to keep that open because of the potential behavioural impacts. And it would be very helpful if, in responding, the Minister tells us a little bit about why the Department have reached that conclusion and on what basis they are making that. I think the critical point here is that there will be that families, as we know, households, as we know, are looking for clarity. We are expecting the energy cap to rise again significantly in the autumn. There is real fear and anxiety in the country about what inflation, energy prices and general inflation is doing to household incomes. People are looking for certainty. And the sooner that they are able to know exactly when their qualifying period is going to be and when the payment page is going to be, the better it is going to be for those families. And it would be also very helpful for us to know what the implications are of a qualifying date which could be 1 month which could be 1 month earlier, so to cover the span of options for that date. So although we will not be seeking to push these amendments to a vote, I would very much like the Minister to advise that he will be able to pick that up and come back to us with answers on that point. New Clause 2 addresses the issue of the distribution and the equality impact assessment. Now, we have indeed had some analysis from the Treasury, and we have had some that looks at the economic distributional impact and the decile impact, and indeed, as you would expect from measures that are heavily directed towards means-tested benefits, they are indeed progressive. I think that's absolutely right. But the main thing that we were, I think probably the single most important topic that we have just discussed in the short second reading was the downside of single payments that are household unit payments and that therefore don't reflect differences in household composition. The impact assessment does not give us that information, and I think it's absolutely critical that we do have that information. So I will press the Minister on this point. I think we need a much fuller assessment, both of what the Treasury expects to be the impact of a reliance on single payments, rather than an updating of the an accurate updating of the within the benefits system. And also, as soon as possible, after the first payments have been made, for an assessment to be made of what the actual impact has been in terms of the distribution. I think household composition is probably the single most important of the areas of analysis that we need to track. It is the one that I think is worrying people the most, and the one where the disparity between a direct payment through the social security system and a one-off payment is most marked. We want to see an analysis that looks at different recipient groups, that looks at the impact on pensioners, that looks at the impact on people with disabilities, that looks on the impact on families, single people and working people of the distribution of the payments as they go out. And I think it would be helpful also to look at whether how different working groups are affected. Self-employed, we have discussed, working households as opposed to households on out-of-work benefits. The other area that I'll just spend a couple of minutes on in this context, in terms of analysis, is the various payments that have been distributed through local government and how we can look at the impact of those. The Government Minister has just repeated again that, that his principal aim was to try and get benefits payments out as quickly as possible to those who need it most. In fact, the February announcement, the distribution of income through local authorities through the council tax, does the exact opposite to that. As I'm sure he is aware, that if households do not pay their council tax by direct debit, local authorities have had to go to the considerable lengths now of writing to everybody who pays council tax, but other than through direct debit, wait for them to respond, wait for them to provide information confirming who they are and their entitlement, and then send that out, which of course means that very large numbers of people reliant on that £150 have not yet had it, and indeed it's likely to be weeks and weeks and weeks still before those families do actually get them, because it is a payment that actually requires people to deal with official correspondence. And I don't know if the Minister's actually seen some of the letters that have gone out from local authorities, because I certainly have, and I struggle to understand them. And a number of those ones have gone out without any reference to people on council tax support, for example, so people don't know that they are likely to be ones who would be covered by the scheme. I think it is really important that we understand a distributional impact of the household support funds and of the distribution of funds by local authorities. The government has been very keen to stress the value of these schemes and how they are locally sensitive and that local government has got an important role to play in delivering this, and that may indeed be the case. But it is undoubtedly a more complex, a more bureaucratic system for delivering help into people's hands than, as we have said all along, actually uprating and delivering directly through pensions, through the social security system. Before we go further into this year, knowing what we know about inflation still soaring, energy costs still soaring, the likelihood that we will be returning to this place to consider yet more emergency support later in the year, it is absolutely critical that we understand exactly how the government's support packages delivered are affecting people, who they are affecting, and whether it is the single best way in which we can provide help to people in need.
Very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Apologies. I've got a few things on the specifics of the bill and actually that have been raised during the course of this debate. I understand the Minister's point about the second qualifying date and the point, in fact, that the Secretary of State made earlier about not wanting to make clear what the second qualifying date is, and I'm not going to argue about that point. What I am going to question is the actual timelines for the payment. We had the qualifying date of the 27th of May and we're looking at the 14th of July for the actual payment to be made, which is a significant lag. If we're looking at a similar length of time, then we're looking at people not getting that additional payment, that second additional payment, until nearly Christmas. Given that the Minister was clear that the reason it's been done is in two payments in some part is to help with budgeting, actually what people would really like is some level of certainty about the dates that the payments are going to be made. I'm not going to press them on the qualifying date. As I said, I don't disagree necessarily with the choice to not publish the qualifying date at this moment and to bring it forward through negative delegated legislation. I think that makes some level of sense. But for the other thing for people is about the other payments that they may or may not be about to be able to receive. We've heard from the opposition front bench about the council tax payments and the fact that people have not necessarily received those council tax payments and they don't know when they might receive that money. Actually, for people who are really struggling now, having a level of certainty about when those payments will come, about when we haven't even got the legislation. I don't think we've got the legislation for the £400 in terms of the energy bills. You know, we don't know when that is going to happen, or I'm not aware when those dates are going to be. So, you know, in order for people to plan, if they are looking at this potential income that they're getting, if the government's saying £1,200 for some families, it would be really helpful for them to know when this is likely to be. In terms of the negative resolution that will be coming through in order to set the second qualifying date, I'm assuming that that's not likely to come until after the summer recess, that we're not likely to see that. If the Minister, when he's on his feet, could just confirm that that is the case, then that would be helpful for us to have an understanding. If he's not able to do that, then that's fine, but just, you know, if he can, then that would be really helpful. Another comment that was made was around by the member from Aber Valley in relation to the people who get two payments in a month, for example, because they're paid on a 4-weekly basis, or because they receive bonuses or anything of that sort. It would be very helpful if the Minister, in setting the second qualifying day, would try to ensure that it's not in a cycle that will disadvantage the same people twice. So if there are people whose whose universal credit is paid on a cyclical basis, and you can very clearly see that actually every 3 months or something is a regular cycle for a significant number of people, if it means that they lose out on the £324 and the £326, even though they're regular universal credit claimants, if you like, over the course of a year, then I would be concerned that the government was not quite doing that in the right way. And I think the point that was made by the member from Amber Valley about considering doing it over a 2-month period would have probably been a better way to do it than the way that the government is putting forward. And perhaps should, as was stated, should there be a future need for any of this to be for further additional cost of living payments to be made to people, then if the Minister could consider that, that would be very helpful. Just the last thing on it is about recovery of incorrect payments. The Minister mentioned recovery of incorrect payments and how recovery of incorrect payments might work or might need to work. I am concerned that we're going to end up in a situation, but he was mentioning it in the context of doing payments too quickly. and the fact that if payments were done too quickly, we might end up in a situation where people received the payment when they weren't entitled to receive the payment, and then they would need to have that clawed back from them. I'm slightly concerned by the way that he phrased that we might end up in a situation where if people do receive payment in error, through no fault of their own, that they think that they may be entitled to, that we're going to end up with that being clawed back from future payments that they might be receiving from DWP. Now, given that we've seen that situation with tax credits over the years, we've seen that people are still paying back legacy benefit overpayments that they received. We've seen the pain and suffering that that can cause to people. If the government expects to, the government's obviously going to make some errors in making this payment, right? You know, you cannot have a 100% error-free system. The government is potentially going to make some errors. I would be concerned if the government would then claw back this money from people who had genuinely thought that they were entitled to it, and it would have an even worse impact on their cost of living than the current crisis is. So if the Minister could explain, if he's able to at this moment, what's likely to happen should somebody receive one of these payments in error through no fault of their own, expecting that they should have received it, you know, not really knowing that it was an accident, and then beginning, you know, would that be clawed back by the government, or would the government just write off and say, look, you know, we made a mistake, but you can just keep it because it was our error, it wasn't your error, we don't want to put you through additional pain in order for that. I will have more comments to make and questions to ask at third reading, but those are the comments that I've got. Questions that I've got on the substance of the clauses that there are in the bill. Just one last thing, Chair. The very last thing I would say is I would thank the Government for including the Scottish payments for disability in the eligibility criteria. We're doing our best to have an excellent social security system on the basis of dignity and respect, and I appreciate the UK Government working with the Scottish Government to ensure that the Scottish disability payments, those in receipt of those payments, do also get the additional £150. That is appreciated.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful for the contributions that have been made. Perhaps I can just briefly respond to them. To the first point, to the last point that was made about the Scottish qualifying benefits, yes, individuals will be able to receive £150. As far as the second payment, the reason why we are having to be careful in terms of setting out the definitive details on this is because of fraudulent behaviour. We certainly saw that with the other payments that were made during the pandemic. So we can't be explicit about this as perhaps we might have been. Now we know the levels of fraud that are going on around benefits. But I can assure honourable members that the second payment, the regulations around that, will take place after recess. The other point that has been made is about timing of cycles. That's an important point, and we'll be doing everything we can to make sure those cycles don't align so that people that may not have been able to qualify in the first payment will be able to. It's going to be difficult because we're moving at extreme pace here with huge volumes of claimants, but we'll do everything we can to assist those individuals. It's not often that the Honourable Member for Aberdeen North says things that I completely support and agree. But I will on this occasion, and that's that we all, and particularly government, need to do a lot more work to communicate these payments. There are lots of them, they're targeted, and so there's a duty on us to make sure that we communicate very clearly when these things are going to happen. But there are reasons why the second payment we can't be as clear on the timing. In terms of household composition and the other points made by the Honourable Member for Westminster North, understand her point. It would be great to have more data sometimes in these situations, but we've produced an impact analysis. That's not always the case in these situations, to make sure that colleagues can understand what is available for their constituents at a constituency level. We've also seen the distribution analysis, which looks at comparator groups. This is really important data, and I think it helps paint a pretty broad picture of direction of how these particular payments are going to help vulnerable and low-income families across the United Kingdom. And in terms of the Household Support Fund, this will indeed make sure that we can provide support for people with the cost of essentials. And it's vital that local authorities do this work and that they report back to government on the work that they've been doing. So, Chair, I hope that with these points I can make the case that these new clauses are now withdrawn, and beg to move each of these clauses.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I shall take Clauses 2 to 11 together. The question is that Clauses 2 to 11 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. 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 Whip to report.
I beg to report that the committee has gone through the bill and made no amendment.
We now move directly to third reading.
Now.
I call the Minister to move the third reading. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the DWP Bill team and cross-government officials who stood up to deliver this legislation and indeed the payment mechanisms at pace. The House authorities, parliamentary staff, clerks and doorkeepers and members across the House who have participated in the debate and in this committee previously. This bill reflects the government's commitment to supporting low-income households and disabled people across the United Kingdom. Due to the current economic circumstances, many people need additional support to alleviate financial pressures caused by the cost of living challenge. That's why this government is providing a significant package of support worth £37 million this year alone. It includes £150 council tax rebate in England, £400 support through the Energy Bill Support Scheme, £650 cost of living payment for people entitled to the qualifying means tested benefits, £150 disability cost of living payment for people entitled to a qualifying disability benefit, £300 additional support for pensioners through a top-up to winter fuel payments. In practice, this means that people in receipt of universal credit or another qualifying means-tested benefit could receive £1,200 of additional support. This could increase to £1,350 if an individual also receives a qualifying disability benefit. The bill provides the government with the necessary powers to administer the £650 cost of living payment and the £150 disability cost of living payment. These payments will provide targeted support to 8 million people, including some pensioners and 6 million disabled people. We want to ensure these payments are in people's bank accounts as soon as possible. We intend to begin phasing payments from the 14th of July, subject to the bill securing royal assent on the 30th of June. This bill is a further demonstration of the action this government is taking to support people across the country, and I commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. Jonathan Ashworth.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, can I join the Parliamentary Under Secretary in thanking the clerks, the bill team, members who have spoken across the House. Can I thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for your for guiding us to what looks like an early finish with skill, as always, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for the courtesy in which he has responded to the queries that members have raised. I did not always agree or get the answers that I necessarily wanted, but I appreciate the way in which he engaged with great detail, politely, and endeavoured to answer all points that members across the House have raised in the proceedings today. As I said, at second reading, we do not intend to stand in the way of this bill at all. We totally understand the need for the Secretary of State to make arrangements for these payments to be delivered swiftly. Although we do believe the government should have acted sooner, the result of not acting sooner has been considerable anxiety and hardship for many of our constituents who have already had to grapple with the £20 cut to universal credit and other measures such as the pernicious two-child policy over many, many years. Many members have raised the different hard edges which are still there because of the flat payment nature of the legislation. One way of dealing with that would have been bringing forward a benefit up rating. And I do think it is curious that ministers have told us that was not possible, when in fact that is exactly what the Secretary of State for then Social Services did in 1975, Barbara Castle, when she said we're going to do 2 up ratings in a year because of exceptionally high rates of inflation. If they could do it in 1975, it is curious that we can't do it 40 odd years later. And then, of course, the position of the Conservative Party in them days was that up ratings should happen twice a year. That was Norman Fowler's position. I was also grateful for the Secretary of State in responding to my question about the up rating for next year. And she did say to us that with respect to the triple lock and the up rating of other pensions, which we have heard from the Chancellor that they will be uprated in line with September, but we can see the pressure that is being put on the government by some voices in the media and so on. The Secretary of State said these will be, matters will be reviewed as per the legislation. I hope that doesn't turn out to be a get-out clause for the government on the triple lock and benefit uprating later this year. We'll be watching these issues like a hawk. And our big worry, although we will not stand in the way of this bill, is that the government still does not have any serious plan to deal with the ravages of inflation. There has been debate across the chamber today about the second payment. But with inflation where it is today, that second payment, if it's paid in November or December, by my rough calculation, in real terms, it will lose value from the £324 that the government is legislating for. In real terms, the value of that, that's my rough calculations just now on the bench, will be about £307 because of the levels of inflation. Unless the government get a grip of this inflation, I fear the government will have to come back to the House, either with an autumn statement or with another emergency budget, to pursue other measures to help some of the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. So we will not vote and divide the House tonight, Mr Deputy Speaker. We welcome the legislation as far as it goes, but I fear further help will be needed very soon in the future.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I also would like to join in with the thanks, particularly to the Clerks team, who have been incredibly helpful as ever. I expect nothing less and have never received anything less from the House of Commons staff. They're always excellent. But I would also like to echo the Minister's thanks and thank all of those within DWP and HMRC that are going to be working so hard to make sure that this happens. We do appreciate the additional amount of work that this is going to be, and it has been up already, in order to get this into place. So we're massively supportive of all of those staff that are going to be doing a really difficult job and potentially working an awful lot in order to pull this off. So that is massively appreciated. I just want to make a few points and mention a few different things. The bill that is being put forward, although welcome, although additional, although going towards the cost of living, it doesn't cover the cost of living increases that our constituents are facing. It does not cover the fact that it doesn't even cover energy prices increases. Never mind when you take into account the inflation that there is in the most basic foods, for example, that people just have to buy. You can't get away without buying pasta or rice or bread. You know, the massive increases that we're seeing in those mean that people are stuck. They have to buy these things. And we have already had that time lag to get us to now. People are not getting the payments today. I appreciate they're getting them quickly. They're not getting the payments today, and people will already be feeling that squeeze and struggling. So the £326 on the horizon is great. It's helpful for people, but it's not enough. It doesn't provide the level of support that uprating benefits in April could have provided for people, which would have helped with that squeeze, which would have helped with that squeeze in the cost of living that we have. The one really big thing that the government could do today to make a massive, massive difference to people's lives is to put up the pretendy minimum wage, pretendy living wage, to a real living wage, to a wage that people can actually live on. That is something that is reserved to Westminster. It's something the Scottish Parliament cannot do, does not have the powers to do. but it is something that would make a difference to people. And the honourable member from Ashfield was talking about his constituents and his hard-working constituents, and the hard work that they do and the amount of money that people get on benefits. But the thing is that 40% of people on universal credit are in work. 40% of those people, 40% of, a huge number of people who are going to food banks with children, a huge number of people whose children are in poverty are in work. At least one parent in those households are in work. So I get that the government wants to get people into work. I get that, right? But people are in work and still cannot afford to live, still are having to have this top up by the government. And you can help fix that problem by increasing the minimum wage to a real living wage, giving it to everybody who's over 18, removing the inherent ageism that there is in this. The other thing that the government has missed and failed in this bill is people who have got no recourse to public funds. People who have got no recourse to public funds are, by definition, missed by this government. That's the intention of what they are doing. But we are seeing that the most destitute, desperate people in our society are those people who have got no recourse to public funds. And this bill fails to provide support to anybody who is not on those gateway benefits, or anybody who is struggling but doesn't fit into those criteria. I think this is particularly acute when people have got no recourse to public funds, we are seeing children literally starving because their parents have got no recourse to public funds. Some of this is still in the case of things like people who have got people who are fleeing domestic abuse, for example, and are not eligible for the destitution domestic violence concession that there is in place because they're, for example, EU citizens or their partner was a student. There are lots of problems with this. The other things that are missing is we don't know when we're going to get the legislation for the pensioner cost of living payment. As soon as we know, if the Minister could let us know when that legislation is coming, that would be very helpful. If the Minister could let us know when we're going to get the Energy Bills Support Scheme legislation, because this is only part of the package. We've been discussing the whole package, but this legislation only puts in a bit of it. And the other thing that we don't have, despite the question of the honourable member whose constituency I forget from Wales, in relation to the paying for all of this and where the money is going to come from. We don't have the legislation on the payments, the charges that are going to be made on the energy companies. We don't have that legislation yet. And if we could at least have a timeline for when we expect that legislation to come, then we wouldn't be in this situation that we've had, where we've had this bill appear a week before we're going through every single process on this bill. MPs need longer to look at these other pieces of legislation that are coming through. And if the government can do anything to ensure that we get slightly more time even to scrutinise this legislation as it comes in, then that would be appreciated. But as I said, Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the government for bringing forward this package. It's not enough. They need to go further. They need to operate benefits and backdate that to April. But we do welcome this package.
Thank you very much. The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion relating to business of the House. Today, Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the motion relating to the Speaker's Conference. Minister to move.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I beg to move the motion standing in my name on the order paper. I bring forward the motion on behalf of Mr Speaker to establish a Speaker's Conference to consider and make recommendations on the employment conditions of members of staff in order to ensure a more inclusive and respectful working environment. The treatment and safety of those who work on the estate is paramount, and I pay tribute to Mr Speaker for bringing this matter to the forefront of our attention today, and I commend the fact that he has worked across party and across the House to make sure this motion is brought before us today in the House. As all members will be aware, under our current system, individual MPs are responsible for the employment of their own staff. This is a long-standing practice, and the Conference will be able to consider whether this remains appropriate. I don't seek today to answer that question. I don't think this moment is the moment to debate that, but should the House agree to today's motion and the accompanying memorandum from the Clerk of the House, then the Conference will approach this task without any preconceptions. Of course I give way to my own friend.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. Paragraph 6 stipulates that the Conference shall produce its first report to the House no later than the 31st of October this year. In view of the fact there are 2 scheduled parliamentary recesses between now and that date, does he not think this is rather ambitious?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. Of course, that would be an interim report, I think. So, as my understanding, Mr Speaker would draw that committee together. He would then establish the sort of narrative and what they were looking at. And I think that would be an opportunity then for the House to sort of reflect on the direction of travel. And I think that will be an early opportunity for members to get a sense of the direction of travel of that committee. Honourable members will be aware that Speakers' Conferences are actually not common. I think the most recent one was 2008. That's actually before myself and many other members were elected to this place. And I think that was actually established, I think, to look at representation of women, ethnic minorities and disabled people in the House. I think it proved actually to make progress in that direction. I certainly hope that this Speakers' Conference, like the 2008 one, will be as effective. It will be a committee of the House of Commons and will have the same powers and legal protections that entails, and this will ensure that it can secure any evidence it needs and that evidence will be given to it freely. Of course.
Honourable friend for giving way. Under paragraph 5A, where it talks about powers, is it his understanding that members of Parliament and current members of staff will be fully consulted in this process?
So, of course, I would fully expect that the Speakers' Conference will take representations from members, and once we are aware of the members who are on that committee, and I would encourage her to make representations to the Chief Whip's office if she wants to be considered, that all members will be aware of who is on that committee and will be able to feed in to this process. The Speakers' Conference will include, of course, Mr Speaker, 14 other members. Mr Speaker will appoint these members with regard to party representation, and of course he will have full discussions with those party representatives to make sure and give them the opportunity to feed those names in. As the motion sets out, the Speakers' Conference would have the powers enjoyed by all those other select committees. As I said to my honourable friend, it will report its preliminary findings no later than the 31st of October. And just as was the case with the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme, which was set up for the employment of members and staff, it is a matter for this House to decide how we progress. And I think it would be worthy at this moment in time just to pay tribute to my predecessors, the Honourable Member for North East Somerset and the Honourable Member for South Northamptonshire, who made great strides in establishing the ICGS. I think that it provided a dedicated independent mechanism for the handling of complaints of bullying, harassment and sexual misconduct. And I think this will be an opportunity to improve the working culture, to continue to make progress in that direction. The government's made it clear that there's no place in this building or in this Parliament for bullying, harassment or sexual harassment. And as a Leader of the House, I'm determined we can do all we can to make sure that this does not happen. And with cross-party support, working together within this House, I think we can make great progress. Should the House agree to establish the Speakers' Conference, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish Mr Speaker well in his endeavours. It'll be a beneficial change, promoting positive working environments, and I offer the House my full support in its progress.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, Tangham Debonair.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I too very much welcome the motion on the Speakers' Conference and thank Mr Speaker for his leadership on this. This offers us all an opportunity to consider the employment conditions of member staff, and I feel that this is the right time to be doing this. I'm afraid following another damaging few months to the reputation of this House, when we have had serious allegations and unfortunately convictions against some members, not a very large number, but it is important that we make sure that we are providing good working practices for all members' staff, and this, I think, is a really important step forward. Now, Gemma White's report into the bullying and harassment of MP staff, since then the House has made a lot of progress in how we employ, manage and treat our staff, and providing them with a form of redress, complaint and assessment of those complaints. But we now need to take further steps, and I think we've had the establishment, for instance, of the Member Services team, to whom I pay great tribute. I've always found them extremely helpful, approachable and a font of knowledge, and I urge other colleagues who may not have come across them to make use of the fact that they are camped out in the Portcullis House atrium every day, and a friendly face and help awaits you. Members have access to a range from them of best practice employment guides and the opportunity to attend regular workshops. And again, all members are encouraged to use this, but we do need to build on this. We do need to strengthen our structures and processes. Just wish to place on record some of the concerns that some members have expressed to me, that it would be IPSA that is the body that ends up employing member staff. Now, the point of the conference is to look at all reasonable options, but I think it's important just to put on record that my understanding is, and I'm not speaking on behalf of IPSA, my understanding is that IPSA themselves have expressed reservations about whether that would be appropriate. And I certainly feel that at the moment we've got other options to consider, and that's what the conference is for. I'm also very glad, in response to the honourable member's question and the leader's answer, just to reiterate that the motion specifies the date of the first report, not the second or the third or the final. There could be many others, is the 31st of October. But I think it's important that the House is able to debate these at regular intervals, scrutinise the work being done. As the leader mentioned, there will be cross-party membership. It will take on select committee powers. It will have the power to require evidence and witness statements and information to be prepared for it in the same way as a select committee. I think that's the right thing to do. And also the leader also mentioned, and I would echo this, that the previous Speakers' Conference marks a point in which we have made much progress. So having a Speakers' Conference on ethnicity and increasing ethnicity and diversity and gender representation in this place has been followed by a marked increase in all of the above. So I do feel that this bodes well for the next Speakers' Conference. Madam Deputy Speaker, finally, the House of Commons is a beacon for democracy around the world. I feel that we have in our hands the opportunity to make it also a model workplace at the forefront of workers' rights, with strong protections in place for all of our staff, because future generations should inherit a safer, more inclusive Parliament where everyone has someone to turn and where staff are able to fulfil their potential in every single team across this House. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Maria Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I welcome my right honourable friend's motion today and his support for the Speakers' Conference. Organisations are, by definition, made up and completely dependent on the individuals who make them up. So making sure that employment conditions and that we have a respectful working environment is essential to make sure we attract the best people to this place. So it is important that we get this right. And get it right not only because it's important for our staff in constituency offices, but also to the point that the Honourable Lady, who's speaking for the opposition, raised. But it's important for the way Parliament is viewed. And it's really important that we are viewed as being the best place in the world in terms of democratic freedoms, democratic rights, and putting into place the best legislation that we can. And having the best people here, treating them well, has got to be part of that. But I'm sure that my right honourable friend will wholeheartedly agree that issues to do with employment law are incredibly complex and difficult. And that's why I was particularly pleased to see that at 5C there's a power within this to appoint legal advisers. And I hope that the committee does that and gets the best legal advice, because it is very easy for all of us to think we know how to change things, but we've got to make sure it doesn't have any unintended consequences as a result of any lack of expertise, although I know there's a number of members on our benches who are experts in employment law in their own right, but that independent advice will be important. I think the other factor that is important to consider is that things have changed hugely in the last 2 years. Not only do we have enormous numbers of new members of parliament who came in 2019, but also as a result of COVID, we've seen a huge spike in the amount of constituency work our officers are undertaking, and indeed IPSA has recognised this by increasing the funding for it. But my office staff certainly brought to my attention there may be an increased fund, but there isn't necessarily an increased amount of space for those people to be in, particularly if they're located in London. So I think looking at perhaps a little bit more broadly at the conditions that our staff live in, as this conference will, work in, will be important for them as well as anything else to do with their employment contracts. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, most importantly, these are matters for members. And I think Mr Speaker is absolutely right to constitute a committee of members to look at this. I would argue that there are many other issues that we should be looking at on a very regular basis, perhaps a little bit more regularly than since 2008. How many years have elapsed since 2008 and now, when the last Speakers' Conference came together, and that there might be a need to perhaps look at having something which looks at these issues on a more regular basis. Employment practices are changing in the outside world on a regular basis. We as members have to make sure that we stay abreast of that. We are in control of how this place is run, as we're often told, but we don't always have the methods to be able to bring those changes into place. We have the House committees which do meet, but they don't necessarily cover all of the issues. They certainly don't cover the issues to do with member staff. And indeed, there's no way of those committees coordinating and working together. So I hope that might be something that this Speakers' Conference could also look at. I just have a couple of questions, Madam Deputy Speaker, for my right honourable friend. And indeed, one of them, the Honourable Lady for Guildford's already covered. But firstly, just making sure that, that there will be consultation with members and staff. It isn't explicit in here, but it must be implicit. That secondly, IPSA will be required to work with this committee, because I think it's, or this conference, because I think it's absolutely essential that we do have that they have a central role in providing information in a timely manner and in an accurate and timely manner that members of the committee would need. And then thirdly, my right honourable friend may not be aware, but the Administration Committee, under the extremely expert chairmanship of my honourable friend, Charles Walker, whose constituency, Broxbourne, we are actually undertaking at the moment an inquiry looking at a number of different issues, but particularly the issues around exiting members, so members who leave this place, either voluntarily or not voluntarily. And we've all been struck by the amount of time, in the evidence that we've taken so far, the amount of times that the treatment of staff has come up as a real deep concern amongst members who are leaving this place. The treatment of staff, I have to say, by IPSA, the treatment of staff even more generally within the House. And so therefore I would hope that perhaps my right honourable friend, through his good offices, could make sure that this conference would also look carefully at the findings of that Administration Committee report, as well as the other things that are set out here, because I think that we would be letting our staff down if we didn't try and make sure that the two things complemented each other and there was a read across there. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Pete Wishart.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Leader of the House for bringing this motion forward to the House today, and congratulate the Speaker for considering this issue and making sure that we have the opportunity to consider the whole environment of the working arrangements of staff members of this House. And I think this is a key time to do this for the many reasons that have already been put forward this afternoon, not least for the fact that we're 650 members and we're all pretty different in how we arrange our offices and our staff complements. And it always strikes me that many of us, I'm thinking of myself in this regard, come to this House with no experience whatsoever of managing staff, of making sure that we have a staff complement available and ready to do very complex and demanding work. It's only got more demanding in the course of the past 2 years. So some sort of service, I think, that takes account of everybody across this House, I think would be welcome, not just from members of Parliament, but staff right across here. And I welcome the fact that the conference will be in the form of a select committee. I think it's a format that's very much familiar again to this House. The select committee process is I think the member survey came second in terms of satisfaction about how members of Parliament relate to the select committee structure. So I'm glad that it's able to work along that basis, allow the opportunity to get a whole range of evidence, and I'm sure the many requests for the type of evidence to be given will be considered by the conference, and we'll hear from the widest range of voices. But I think the key word in all of this is the word consider, and it says that this House considers it as desirable to consider the employment conditions of member staff. I mean, consider is so important that it's clumsily included twice in the one sentence in this motion, and this is what it's about. No decision has been made. This is a conference and a committee that will consider all the different aspects of all this, and I think it's incumbent upon all the House to make sure that their views are heard about all this, to get in touch with the House, get in touch with the members who will be serving on this committee. But this is a good innovation. This is something that I think the whole House will welcome. There's a huge opportunity for whoever's on this committee and all the political parties in this House to design and to craft the type of working arrangements that we think are best placed to suit this unique environment that we all work in just now. So I welcome this, Madam Deputy Speaker. I look forward to working with this as a member of the House of Commons Commission, and I look forward to looking at its considered work when we see its first report in October.
Lord President of the Council.
Thank you, Member Speaker. I'll just respond briefly and thank members for taking the trouble to turn up today and to contribute, but also just to respond on behalf of Mr. Speaker to say that yes, of course it will have the powers of a select committee, so of course it will consult with members, and I'm sure that Mr. Speaker will be reading Hansard to hear the debate today, and I know that many of the comments will be taken on board. Can I specifically just pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Basingstoke, who I know has worked a great deal in this area and has a large amount of expertise and a lot to offer, and I'm sure that the Speakers' Conference will be taking note of that expertise, whether she is a member of the committee or a witness appearing in front of it. I'm sure that will be of huge benefit to them. So the remit of that committee, I don't want to box Mr. Speaker in, because I want to allow the committee to establish what they're looking at and in what order. So I'm sure that will be brought forward and agreed in due process. So I'm delighted to commend this motion to the House, and I'm grateful for members who have contributed today.
Thank you. I'm certain that Mr. Speaker will be paying extreme attention to all that's been said in this short debate. And the question is, as on the order paper, as members of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And so we come to motion number 7 on Committee of Standards. Lord President.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as members of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thank you. Petition, Mr. Robert Largan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to present a petition on behalf of the residents of Hayfield and local councillor Eva Lawson, calling on Royal Mail to install an accessible postbox in the village. At present, residents have to rely on the postbox inside the post office, and when the post office is closed, they're forced to cross a busy A624 dual carriageway to access any other postbox, causing lots of issues for the elderly, disabled and families with small children. The petition, organised by the very hard-working councillor Eva Lawson, has been signed by hundreds of villagers. And so, the petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urge the Government to note the need for an additional postbox in Hayfield, recognise the benefits this would bring to local residents, walkers and holidaymakers, and urge Royal Mail to install a new postbox.
Thank you.
Petition, postbox in Hayfield.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Ruth Edwards.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. It must be every parent's worst nightmare. Last September, Dylan Rich, a talented 17-year-old footballer from Rushcliffe, was playing in a FA Youth Cup game between his club, West Bridgford Colts, and Boston United at the Colts ground in Regatta Way. Out of nowhere, a couple of minutes into the match, he suffered a cardiac arrest and collapsed. His brave mother, Anna, performed CPR on her own son. Dylan was treated with a defibrillator at the scene, and an ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. He regained cardiac output and was stabilised in intensive care, but tragically he died 3 days later in hospital. Words cannot express the depth of sorrow that his death has caused to his family, his friends, and the community at West Bridgford Colts. In their tribute to him, the Colts said, "Dylan was one of those players that teammates loved for his commitment, coaches for his attitude and adaptability, and supporters for his reliability. A fantastic club player." Tributes followed from Nottingham Forest and Notts County. Ahead of their World Cup qualifier against Poland, the England players held up a shirt with "For Dylan" printed on it. But the tribute that his family and his club most want, Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I apologise, is to increase the number of defibrillators across the UK, to make them cheaper for communities to buy, and to increase people's awareness and confidence in using them. Until Dylan's death, I had never looked at the figures for the scale of cardiac arrests. Sudden cardiac arrest is one of the leading causes of death in young people and almost never has any prior symptoms. Officially, around 32,000 sudden cardiac arrests occur in England every year. When combined with figures from across the UK, it's estimated that the true number is as high as 60,000. And there's an important caveat to this figure. It only includes incidents where resuscitation was attempted. In the UK, only 8% of people survive an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest can happen to anyone. This was brought home to us again in Nottinghamshire just last month, Madam Deputy Speaker, when 13-year-old Samuel Akwasi collapsed from a cardiac arrest during a young Elizabethan Football League game and tragically died later in the Queen's Medical Centre. In fact, just yesterday, as I was writing this speech, I read of an assistant referee, Andrew Jarvis, who suffered a cardiac arrest whilst officiating a game in Mansfield last August. Mercifully, he survived. He says he was saved by good quality CPR, the football club's defibrillator, and the quick arrival of the air ambulance team. So on average, a person in the UK has an 8% chance of surviving a cardiac arrest if it happens out of hospital. But this is vastly increased to as high as 70% if a defibrillator is used within the first 3 to 5 minutes of the cardiac arrest occurring. Conversely, survival rates drop by 10% for every minute of delay after this time, which further highlights why it's essential to have a defibrillator on every sports pitch and street corner possible, because these machines save lives. Average survival rates for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest vary across the country, ranging from 0.6 to 25%. The government is doing so much to address regional inequality across the country, but we must also address regional inequality in defibrillator access and survival rates. The main barriers to accessing defibrillators have been shown to be cost and awareness. 42% of people surveyed by Vitreous World said that cost was the main barrier to owning a defibrillator. 62% of people don't know how to use one, and 27% are worried about how to use one. So let's look at these barriers. Firstly, cost. Defibrillators vary in cost, but the average unit is around £1,250. This is a considerable expense to many community groups, charities and sports clubs, especially when you consider that a sizable proportion, 20% of this, is VAT. £250 is a lot of money for organisations, raising funds through cake sales, individual donations and raffles. Some charities are exempt from paying VAT on defibrillators. Not-for-profit hospitals and charitable institutions that either provide care or medical or surgical treatment for disabled people, or rescue or first aid services. But most sports clubs and community groups don't qualify under these rules. Now, there are several options to reducing the cost of defibrillators. The first is to apply a zero rate of VAT to all defibrillators, in line with that already applied to a range of medicines and medical products, including all prescription medicines and drugs. A blanket rate would be a simple and straightforward solution that covered anyone and any organisation wanting to buy a defibrillator. Now, happily.
Thank the Honourable Lady for bringing this forward for Rushcliffe. Declaring interest, Madam Deputy Speaker, is I presented, and the Deputy Speaker was in the chair. I presented an AED bill which will be heard on the 9th of September, and I'd certainly encourage the Honourable Lady to come along and support us on that day if at all possible. Can I also say that one of the things that I understand is that children's car seats and travel systems and indeed other safety protections are rated to 5% VAT. Should this reduction at least not be replicated for this life-saving defibrillator, because by doing so it can very rightly, as I know in my constituency, save lives? Thank you.
Well, I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman on his bill, and I would be delighted to join him on the 9th of September. And he has indeed come up with an option that wasn't actually in my list, the reduced VAT. So that is another excellent option that I think we could explore. Now, I accept that there are many good candidates for zero rate or reduced rate VAT. The Honourable Gentleman opposite has just outlined some. And I'm sure in her answer the Minister will set out that the Government has received £50 billion worth of requests for VAT relief since the EU referendum. And that is a very valid point. Our tax base funds the public services we all rely on. That includes the NHS to treat victims of cardiac arrest. But surely these life-saving devices should be a higher priority than, say, e-books, which I'm a great fan of, but they can't save your life in the event of a cardiac arrest. Now, there's a good argument that since paper books already had zero-rate VAT, extending this to e-books was tidying up the system and necessary to avoid any legal challenge. That's not 100 miles away from the situation with defibrillators, where some charities can benefit from zero-rate VAT, but others can't. Surely, whatever the purpose of the charity, the purpose of using a defibrillator is the same. So perhaps another option is to widen the scope of which organisations can currently purchase a defibrillator without paying VAT, instead of just covering charities that have care or medical, rescue or first aid missions. Couldn't all charities, not-for-profits and community groups be allowed to purchase a defibrillator without paying VAT? After all, businesses can currently claim back VAT on defibrillators as part of their VAT return forms. Such an approach would direct savings to the people who need them most, whilst not setting a precedent for a blanket removal of VAT on a specific item. It also simplifies what is currently a confusing landscape where people are not sure whether they are eligible for this VAT exemption. Or perhaps we could set up a fund for charities and community groups, either to claim back their VAT or to aid them in buying defibrillators. Maybe a pot of money announced in the budget. I'm getting my bid in early. I'm sure that the creative and clever minds at the Treasury could come up with all sorts of options. And I do want to place on record my huge thanks to the Minister, who I know has asked her team to do just that. And whatever model we go for, the end we need to achieve is making community defibrillators more affordable, especially at a time when people's finances are increasingly stretched. And whatever route we choose, we also need to publicise it and use the opportunity to address the lack of knowledge and confidence around defibrillator use. Now, this is something I identify with. I didn't know how to use one myself until Trent First Responders and Nottinghamshire Fire Service kindly offered to train me and my team. In fact, they're training all sorts of groups across Rushcliffe. And I think it would be great if we could have defibrillator and CPR training offered to members and staff here in Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker. Because when we were asked, we were told there wasn't a course that we could do. Now, there are many other courses that Parliament provides. We have media training, diversity and inclusion, courses on how to use the library, and I'm told I can be tutored in any foreign language that could be useful to my work. All of these are important, but none would teach me how to resuscitate a constituent at my surgery whose life was hanging in the balance. Any of the proposed options which I've discussed would be most effective alongside a big push on increasing defibrillator training and a publicity campaign to raise awareness of it. There are loads of people who want to learn how to use a defibrillator and save a life, and there are loads more who can already use one and want to share this knowledge with others. So why don't we help bring them together? And one final thought on how to maximise the impact of such a campaign. At present, it's a legal requirement to have firefighting equipment in places of work, residence, public buildings, everywhere really. Now what you need to have depends on the type of premises, but fire alarms, extinguishers, exit signs are all pretty universal. But there's no legal requirement to have a defibrillator kept at your place of work. Why not? 80% of people believe that defibrillators should be mandated in workplaces, but only 30% of people have a defibrillator in their workplace. Increasing access to defibrillators isn't just the right thing to do, it also makes financial sense. Patients who've had early defibrillation have a significantly reduced stay in hospital and are far less likely to need treatment in intensive care. The average hospital stay is significantly less for survivors when a defibrillator is applied within the 3 to 5 minute window. And they spend less, if any, time in intensive care. Now, figures may differ from hospital to hospital, but on average an ICU bed is around £2,300 more expensive per night. In addition, patients who have a defibrillator used on them quickly have fewer ongoing health problems due to lack of blood and oxygen circulation to vital organs such as the brain. This means they require far less ongoing treatment. In short, we estimate that reducing the cost of defibrillators and increasing the number available for people to use in the community will save the NHS tens of millions of pounds, much needed to reinvest as they deal with the elective backlogs brought on by the pandemic. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I first raised this issue in Parliament at Prime Minister's questions back in March. And I would like to thank both the Minister and the Prime Minister for the priority they have given to this issue since. They both met with my constituents Peter Stansbury and Paul Wilson, who were respectively the chairman and the coach of West Bridgford Colts. And I know the Treasury has been working on a number of options to take this forward. I would also like to thank Peter and Paul for coming to see me in my surgery and making me aware of this issue, and for the incredible work the Colts have done to raise money to buy more defibrillators for their training ground. And I would also like to thank Dylan's family, his mum Anna, his dad Mike and his sister Lucy, for allowing us to tell Dylan's story and for backing the Colts campaign at what must be the darkest time of their lives. Sudden cardiac arrest can tear through the life of any family with devastating results. I am delighted by the energy and commitment the government has shown to working on this issue, and I hope we can now agree on the best way forward and give it the green light, so that we can get on with delivering these life-saving changes. And I'd just like to leave the House with a message from Dylan's mum, Anna, who wrote to me this morning to say, I think it helps to emphasise the importance of community defibrillators in the sense that we did get an output back on Dylan. Sadly, it was ultimately the time he was without adequately oxygenated blood to his brain that led to his death. Without the defibrillator, I don't think we would have even left the football pitch.
Aware that the Honourable Lady wished to take part in the debate. Given that we have a little time, I will. Has the Honourable Lady asked the permission of the Minister to take part in the debate? Yes, and the Minister agrees. And the proposer of the debate, then the Honourable Lady may make a short speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And forgive me, I still have my training wheels on, so there's a bit more I have to learn. And my thanks and congratulations to my honourable friend, the member for Rushcliffe, for securing this important debate this evening. 5 days ago, on the 17th of June, my constituents Pam and Bill Shermer marked the first anniversary of the loss and death of their son Daniel to cardiac arrest. Daniel was only 43 years old, a keen sportsman and soon to be married. Pam and Bill decided to make something positive come from their tragic loss and set up DS43 in Daniel's name. They set about ensuring that no one in Hartlepool will ever be more than 500 metres away from one of these life-saving defibrillators. In just a year, they've been amazing. They've raised in the region of £60,000 and have installed 27 defibrillators. The 28th is going in next week, and they have plans to further install a further 10. Huge difference, inducing people to purchase them and put them in places of work, communal spaces and local businesses, making them more accessible for all throughout their communities. Because Pam and Bill are right, no one should ever be more than 500 metres away from a life-saving defibrillator. Pam, Bill and Daniel were already well known throughout Hartlepool, but through their campaign and fundraising, Pam and Bill have become true pillars of our Hartlepool community. I am proud to know them. They are truly special and an inspirational couple. I wish I could have met their wonderful son. I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to them in this place for all the work they've done in Daniel's memory. I've spoken to the Minister and I know she understands how vital these life-saving machines are, and I would urge her to consider all options to make them more widely available for everyone in our communities.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a privilege to respond to this adjournment debate on behalf of the Government. I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Rushcliffe, for securing this evening's debate. As we've heard, this follows last year's tragic death of her constituent, Dylan Rich, at the age of just 17. It is also terrible to hear of the tragic death of Danny, the son of Bill and Pam Schumer. I commend my honourable friends for the energy with which they are campaigning for a change in policy. As the honourable member for Rushcliffe mentioned, she and I met with the Prime Minister and the representatives from the West Bridgford Colts Football Club in March to discuss this issue. And what she said has touched all of us, and I'd like to express again my condolences to Dylan's family, who themselves have campaigned extremely hard on this issue, as well as to Pam and to Bill. I've heard my honourable friend's argument and those of others here this evening, and in answering the debate, I'll briefly outline the Government's thinking and approach. And let me begin by saying we appreciate the importance of this issue. Automated external defibrillators, or AEDs, save lives. Understanding that, we have sought to boost their provision in many different ways. The Government encourages organisations across England to consider purchasing a defibrillator as part of their first aid equipment. Many community defibrillators have been provided in public locations, including in shopping centres, through national lottery funding, community fundraising schemes, workplace funding, or by charities. The Government has also previously provided significant direct funding for the purchase of AEDs. In the 2015 budget, the Government announced a £1 million grant to support the purchase of public access AEDs. This was followed by a further £1 million in the 2016 budget. These schemes were operated by the British Heart Foundation, and after the first round of funding in 2015, the Foundation announced that over 700 additional AEDs had been installed across the UK. In addition, from May 2020, the Government has required all contractors refurbishing schools or building new ones through centrally delivered programmes to provide at least one AED. And as things stand, there are already over 43,000 registered AEDs in England. The Government has also worked with the British Heart Foundation to develop the Circuit, a national defibrillator network which records information on unregistered AEDs, like those in shops and restaurants. The Circuit is now live in 13 of 14 ambulance services across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. This information is available in a centralised network for easy access in emergencies, meaning that ambulance services can find AEDs when they are most needed. The system also sends out reminders to make sure that AEDs are maintained and emergency ready. Meanwhile, the NHS long-term plan, published in January 2019, includes a section on cardiovascular disease and AEDs. The NHS is committed to developing a national network of first responders and access to AEDs, which will save roughly 4,000 lives a year by 2028. Tax relief does also have a part to play. VAT is not charged on AEDs donated, for example, to the NHS, rescue and first aid charities, and charities caring for disabled people. Local authorities and taxable businesses can also recover VAT on AEDs. The point of all of this is to say that there are existing reliefs, as well as historical funding and other initiatives, which are significantly improving access to AEDs up and down the country. But my honourable friend makes a point about extending that relief. And we have, as she said, examined the specific merits of zero-rating AEDs. What we're conscious of is that the pass-through of a VAT relief on AEDs to consumer prices is likely to be low. Evidence on pass-through of VAT reliefs generally suggests that where markets are concentrated, such as where they are for AEDs, the pass-through tends to be significantly less than 50%. In other words, we don't believe a new zero rate would necessarily lead to a reduction in prices. Instead, businesses may choose to absorb the tax relief as profit. And if we are to take this step, we would need to be sure that zero-rating AEDs would represent genuine value for money and make a real difference in expanding public access to AEDs. And as my honourable friend recognised, at a time for economic challenge, we have a wider responsibility to minimise pressure on the public finances. However, I am grateful to my honourable friend, the honourable member for Rushcliffe, for all the work that she has done and continues to do to bring this issue to public attention. I also recognise the campaigning work done by Pam and Bill, who are at the moment grieving the sad loss of their son, Danny. And therefore, notwithstanding the point I have made about VAT, I want to be clear to those members here today that as we remember Dylan and as we remember Danny, we will continue to look at what more the government can do to expand access to AEDs. And I am aware that the Prime Minister has asked DHSC to examine whether there are any ways to further expand public access to defibrillators. And I have myself spoken to the Minister responsible, the Minister for Patient Safety, on this very issue. Because like the Honourable Member for Rushcliffe and like the Honourable Member for Hartlepool, we know that AED saves lives.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As Mayor of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.